Chapter 901. General Lee had experienced the battles many times, no matter whether it was the battle on that mineral planet or the one that day. He had used them many times, no matter whether it was the scheme against Jingjiu or other strategies. He had done the same thing back when he killed the king of the underworld in Ozawa and the mother nest by the edge of the big antelope. He had worked hard. He had thought hard. The future of the human race. At the end of the broad path. As Jian Shilai said before his death, he was indeed tired. Countless faint but thunderous sounds of collisions and ruptures broke out in his body, but they dissipated as soon as they reached the surface of his body. The stone man of Chinwu Mountain sensed the rainstorm-like vibrations in his wrist, and was stunned speechless. He looked at General Lee, wondering what had just happened. He couldn't see the thin thread. It took a while before he sensed the powerful and sharp energy. The fireball generated by the explosion of the nuclear power furnace was still expanding. The shadow of the battleship grew thicker. The stone man of Chinwu Mountain sensed that General Lee's vitality was fading away. He let out a soundless, angry roar and slashed at the shapeless thread with his fist, dragging the shadow along with him. It was still soundless. A crisp sound rang out in the Tao hearts of the dozens of ascenders. An explosive sound rang out in the communications system of the battleship, making many soldiers cover their ears and squat down on the ground. Hundreds of them even passed out. The thin thread was broken in half. One of the threads was pulled back to the place where the nuclear explosion occurred thousands of kilometers away. The other was left in General Lee's body, curling up slightly, like an earthworm struggling painfully after its body was cut off. The shadow grabbed by the stone man of Chinwu Mountain was cut in half smoothly, and 3 of his fingers were broken as well. His magic method was known as the strongest in Chaotian, but it still couldn't resist this thin thread, or in other words, the all-in-one sword that had been polished. Collect them and study them carefully. The materials are rare, General Lee said to him while lifting his head. The strength of Jingjiu's body was unimaginably strong. No matter whether it was the military laboratory or the laboratory of the Science Academy of the Federation, they couldn't break his body with all kinds of equipment and methods. It was a rare opportunity that day. The thin thread was a part of Jingjiu's body, so they had to treat it seriously. These were General Lee's last words to the stone men of Chinwu Mountain. After saying this, he closed his eyes. His body emitted countless streaks of golden light, but he quickly calmed down. He didn't release light like the sun, turning into a crystal-like object under the support of the powerful will of the great Tao. Even at the last moment, he was still thinking about how to preserve his body, and then preserve the filament in his body, which meant that he was donating his body. The stone man of Chinwu Mountain held General Lee's body in his arms. He pursed his lips and finally began to cry. The 1,000-mile ice ceiling formation disappeared. There was no cold air pouring in like the winter wind. Instead, warm air flowed out like a spring breeze. Hua Xi's hair was brushed away, and the coldness in her eyes dissipated, leaving only confusion and helplessness. He had already left through the chip on the back of her neck and returned to his kingdom. At the moment, Hua Xi was no longer that great being, but an innocent young girl born in the Hua clan of the Stargate base. She didn't even know what had happened. All she knew was that she had suddenly appeared in the dark and cold space, and that she would die in the next moment. She was extremely scared. The filament was cut off. Jingjiu didn't see any change on him, except that his fingernail was a bit shorter. Looking at Hua Xi's pale face and messy hair, Jingjiu thought of someone. He reached out his hand to set up a sword formation of Aoyama, wrapping her up like a piece of cloth. Then, he brought her along and rushed into the fireball created by the nuclear explosion as if they were heading toward death, as if they were trying to hide in the sun. The green light rope bound his wrist, making it impossible for him to wield the underworld fairy sword, and his speed was a bit slow. The officers and soldiers on the battleships and those ascendants could see the scene clearly. The melodious sound of the bell had gradually ceased. The whirlpool on the surface of the golden planet had gradually dispersed, and the ocean-like hot spring on the huge battleship had gradually calmed down. The young girl put down her small hands that covered her ears and straightened the collar of her bathrobe. She picked up the ceramic wine cup and said expressionlessly, "He ran away." She referred to the immortal Tan. It was unclear what method he had employed to pass through the defense system of the planet and disappear into the space under the cover of the scenic cloud bell. Looking at the light brown wine in the ceramic wine cup, the young girl suddenly said, "He ran away as well." She referred to Jingjiu. The ring was the essence of the two civilizations, and even the all-in-one couldn't cut it off easily. Yet, he could close the door of his awareness and prevent the information of the human civilization from entering his body. What she couldn't understand was why the inherited Heaven Sword, which was newly created by the great Grandmaster of Aoyama, couldn't control him even though the program was still in his body. The great Grandmaster of Aoyama took off his conical hat, exposing his ugly face. He moved slowly to the edge of the water and put his feet in, saying, "He has given up on himself." Back to what Jian Shilai had said to Jingjiu, the greatest possibility lies in giving up on oneself. How could he get rid of the control of the inherited Heaven Sword? Both Ping Yongka and Jingjiu had thought about it for many years. The all-in-one sword was an inanimate object, like the rocks by the stream or the ocean of clouds at the bottom of the cliff. It had no intelligence and couldn't respond to the sword, so it couldn't be controlled. In other words, it could be controlled by anyone. It was the sword spirit of the all-in-one sword that could be controlled by the inherited Heaven Sword. It was like a computer. The young girl in the bathrobe couldn't complete the formatting. The system was in a deep sleep mode. Even if one wrote a new system, it couldn't be activated. It was hard to describe the state he was in. If he was in a deep sleep, who could wake him up? If he couldn't be woken up by himself, it was no different from death. In other words, he was like that famous cat. A nuclear furnace exploded. Then, another nuclear power furnace exploded. Two suns rose one after another on the edge of the galaxy outside the fog. It was because the explosions took place in the space that the shock waves couldn't be generated, but the light and heat emitted by the two nuclear furnaces still caused a great deal of chaos. They were like two big fireworks, blocking the sight of many people and making it difficult to monitor the situation. The sudden death of General Li had also caused a great deal of shock and chaos. Without someone in charge, the battleships couldn't maintain the sword formation of Aoyama. All they could do was encircle the area where the explosions had taken place. Normally, Jingjiu couldn't turn into a sword and fly as usual since he was controlled by the inherited Heaven Sword, and his speed was much slower. As such, he shouldn't be able to escape. However, as the fireworks dissipated, the people found nothing. Even Huashi was gone. Only a small half of Jian Shilai's corpse was still hanging in the space in silence, like a bird, bringing the shadow of death and fear to everybody. Where were Jingjiu and Huashi? The reason the meeting was held in the galaxy outside the fog was that it was close to the transportation center of the Scorpion Tail Nebula, making it convenient for the ascendants from various galaxies to come here. The military shut down all the entrances to the twisted passageways as soon as possible, paying no attention to the protests of those large enterprises and clans. As for how much the economy of the Federation would suffer because of this, they didn't even consider it. A few days later, the Scorching Sun battleship landed slowly at the base of the Longtail space fleet. All the officers and soldiers, including the captain of the battleship and the regular mechanic soldiers, were escorted out of the battleship and interrogated strictly. A few battleships of the latest model left the dock after completing their task of escorting Jingjiu, continuing their search. The Scorpion Tail Nebula was the industrial base of the entire human civilization. Countless ores and even small planets were hauled to the space factories here. A great many mining spaceships took off and landed every day. The military had to clean up the galaxy outside the fog in order to block off Jingzhou's escape route. There were bases of the space pirates on some of the planets which could be used easily. Like the 2 mining spaceships destroyed by the laser cannons of the fleet, nothing could impede the advancement of the human civilization. The pirates who had lived in the Scorpion Tail Nebula for years, who could not be wiped out no matter how hard they tried, and who had done too many heinous crimes, welcomed their doom just like that. Thousands of electromagnetic bombs landed on a planet, creating an unimaginable scene of explosion. The electromagnetic bombs seemed to have a certain intelligence after being modified for many generations. They could penetrate the hard super alloys and penetrate the underground fortifications. At least half of the thousands of electromagnetic bombs penetrated deep into the Earth's crust before they unleashed their power to their heart's content. The planet experienced dozens of continuous earthquakes. Whether it was the underground fortifications or the fortresses and manors hidden in the mountains, they were all razed to the ground. A group of space pirates that had occupied this part of the universe for more than 200 years was wiped out. The miners and residents in the distant city heard the sound and walked to the top of the huge iron gate with complicated emotions. They looked at the lightning-like explosion embers rising from the distant mountains, feeling both relieved and confused. Then they heard the latest decree from the Alliance's authorities in the sky. The entire planet had entered a lockdown period, and no aircraft were allowed to leave the atmosphere for an unknown period of time. After completing their mission, the few battleships left the planet. The light of the star was no longer blocked, and they landed on the ground again. After a long period of silence, the crowd suddenly burst into thunderous cheers. Some people were still in a daze, wondering why they were so happy. No one knew that there was an electromagnetic bomb deep underground that had not exploded. When everything calmed down, the electromagnetic bomb opened with a bang, revealing a person lying inside. Jingzhou opened his eyes and stood up. He carried the military bag beside him and slowly walked to the ground. He did not fall into a deep sleep like the girl had predicted, so there was no need to wake him up. Of course, his current situation was also very different from before. The specifics were still unknown, but looking at his slow and heavy footsteps and slightly lowered eyes, he somewhat resembled Zhuoruzhui, who had just come out of seclusion. After a long time, accompanied by a ray of morning light, he walked into the city with the military bag and came to a very remote corner. He looked at the dark and damp sewer and tilted his head slightly, looking a little confused. The green rope of light emitted a ray of light on his wrist, reminding him that he had to hurry. He walked to the sewer and said in a hoarse voice, "I need your help." The sewer was quiet for a long time, and then a somewhat weak sound came from it. Hum hum. Chapter 902. Wearing that ring and connecting with that great mechanical intelligent life carried a huge risk. The reason why Jingzhou was willing to do this was because there were great benefits associated with the risk. The best-case scenario was that he would become the new god and the supreme ruler of the human civilization. Then he would have no need to deal with these troublesome affairs. All he needed to do was to continue his cultivation and advance, and to solve the problem of the sea of dark matter. Even without these, there were still enough benefits to attract him, and that was to find the Snow Girl through the surveillance network that covered the entire universe. The book called The Path Toward Heaven, and the game of the same name had been promoted in the Federation of the Milky Way for some time. All the ascendants knew about it. He didn't believe that the Snow Girl didn't know about it. There were only two possibilities for Xue Jiayi not to come to him. Either she was hiding somewhere in the cold universe to adapt to the environment, or she was unwilling to be found by him. Either way, it didn't seem like a choice the Snow Girl would make. The Queen was the true ruler of Chaotian. How could she live like the immortal Tan? He needed to find the Snow Girl and figure out what was going on. Is this love? Of course not. He was afraid of death. The problem was, if Xue Jiayi didn't want to be found by him, what could he do? the interplanetary network that covered the entire universe and was as ubiquitous as light, as well as the various surveillance networks that were even deeper inside, became the only way. When he was in space, it only took a short period of time for him to put on the ring and receive the torrent of information from the entire human civilization to be implanted by the Grandmaster of Aoyama to control him. That period of time was far from enough for him to search every corner of the galaxy group, but it was enough for him to find some traces through the algorithm he had written in advance. To be more specific, it was an extremely complicated algorithm and process. The main data collection and stimulation points were concentrated in the following aspect: the abnormal phenomenon of a high-speed particle accelerator. Blood Thumb reported a false alarm. The anomalies in the regional temperature statistic. It was an abnormal death. And the most important mark. The first and second points were aimed at the mosquitoes in the fiend prison. The third and fourth points were about the Snow Girl herself. The last point was aimed at Cold Cicada. The Snow Girl brought Cold Cicada with her when she ascended, and Cold Cicada brought the mosquitoes with him. The first 4 points were easy to understand, but the last one was what he told Cold Cicada when it left the Shima Peak. It turned out that his algorithm was correct. With the help of the ubiquitous surveillance network of the Federation of the Milky Way, Jingjiu found the abnormal phenomenon of the high-speed particle accelerator in the laboratory of the Alpha Mine Enterprise and found 2 false positives from the Blood Thumb in this planetary region. He noticed this ordinary planet and found that the average temperature of this planet was 0.3 degrees lower than usual this year. Such a small difference in values would not attract anyone's attention, but when linked to the previous 2 points, it meant a lot. Finally, he saw a red street painting at the bottom of a building in the mining area of the planet. The traces had faded and the strokes were clumsy. He could only vaguely tell that it was a stick-shaped object. Considering that the holder was a snow beetle, it was not that difficult to understand that the red stick was a thoughtless sword. There were 2 other things that Jingjiu could not understand. The Snow Girl likes the cold. Why didn't she live in the universe or somewhere far away from the stars? Why did she live in the human settlement? Why didn't the place she lived in have any abnormal signs of death? There had been a lot of unusual deaths on this planet in the past year, but they were all innocent people killed by the pirate. These problems really gave him a headache. He had a real headache. It was not a mental one, but a physical one. He had been relying on Shen Yunmai's medicine to forcefully block the discharge of electricity in his brain, resulting in a blurred consciousness and a low computing ability, but he still couldn't stop the program completely. The program kept trying to seize control of his body, like the resurrected inherited heaven sword, hacking at his brain incessantly. The raindrops fell on the green light rope, and countless sword wills fell on the deepest part of his soul. In his blurred consciousness and chaotic thinking, he understood why Jian Shilai had to die. Even though he had used the information torrents of the human civilization to erase the imprint left by General Li in Jian Shilai's spiritual world, his spiritual awareness had remained there along with the information torrents. If Jian Shilai were still alive, the Grandmaster of Aoyama would be able to track him at any time through his spiritual awareness, unlike what he was doing now, when the program was sealed in his mind by force. As long as he didn't communicate with the outside world, he wouldn't have to worry about being discovered. It suddenly rained from the sky. This was the heavy industrial area, so the living conditions here were a bit terrible. There was only a single layer of protective shield against radiation and heating, and no other facilities were available. As a result, the rain was acid rain. Jingjiu raised his hand slowly and wiped the rainwater off his face, waiting for her in silence. After a long while, the sound of water in the sewer grew louder and louder, and then something happened again. The mosquitoes were the first to come out. Jingjiu's consciousness was a bit blurry, and his eyesight was not as sharp as usual. Blocked by the heavy rain, he didn't notice them at first. Cold Cicada crawled out next. After being washed by the acid rain, cold cicada revealed its snow-white body. It crawled toward Jingjiu at a high speed, its limbs rubbing against each other incessantly. It looked quite excited. Jingjiu reached out his finger. Cold cicada crawled up at a high speed and squatted on Jingjiu's shoulder, making a high-frequency sound, as if urging Jingjiu to leave. But it turned its head to look at the opening of the sewer from time to time, as if it was reluctant to leave. It was then that the snow girl had finally come out from the sewer along with the faint sound of water and friction. Her entire body was covered with mud and dust, which formed black streams after being washed by the rainwater. She looked filthy. The arrogant and unparalleled demeanor in her dark eyes was gone, replaced by fear and dread. The dominator of Chaotian, the queen of the snowy kingdom, or a pitiful little stray animal. Jingjiu couldn't understand what he had seen. He felt his head ache more and more, and his consciousness grew dimmer and dimmer. In the end, he fell down into the rainwater. It was unclear what changes the disappearance of Jingjiu and the death of General Li would bring to the Federation of the Milky Way. The passage of the Scorpion Tail Nebula was still closed. A few large mining companies felt a great deal of pressure. They kept on lobbying the management committee of the main planet, but they didn't achieve anything. For some people, the influence and changes had arrived sooner than they had imagined. Zhong Lizi left the College of Priests and encountered an assassination attempt on her way back to the Stargate base from the main planet. At the most dangerous moment, she tore the yellow paper crane left by Jingjiu to pieces. As a result, the pirate spaceship was sliced into pieces by countless sword lights. After learning of the incident, the female priest of the Stargate informed the College of Priests as quickly as possible. That being had expressed her attitude, and the military had stopped their operation. The female priest of the Stargate still regarded Zhong Lizi as her personal student. More importantly, she still believed that Jingjiu was the new god, because she had experienced the miracles herself. She believed that what had happened was merely a test set by God for her. However, Zhong Lizi couldn't stay in the praying hall any longer, so she returned to the University of Stargate. In the next moment, she lost her status as an exchange student at the University of Stargate and returned to the Serene Institute. In the next moment, she was expelled by the Fat Dean. It took her a long time and a great deal of effort to travel from the apartment to the Serene Institute to the University of Stargate and then to the College of Priests on the main planet, even though she had the help of Jingjiu. The process of going back to the College of Priests was quite simple. All that was required was a few beeps from the wristband, and the right of access was removed one by one, and her position grew lower and lower. The process was like climbing a mountain. It was very difficult to reach the top of the peak, but all it took was a rapid fall to the ground. Few people remembered the ordinary girl from the underground neighborhood who had moved them in the news. It was because she had indeed turned back into an ordinary girl and returned to the apartment in the underground neighborhood. Come to think of it, it was a little ridiculous. Ding! The door of the apartment was pushed open. Zhong Lizi sat on one end of the soft chair and looked at the other end of the chair, remaining silent for a long time. After a long while, she felt a bit hungry. She went to get some food, but she found it hard to swallow. She walked out reflexively and ordered a plate of grilled eggplants and 2 bottles of ale from a barbecue stall in the black market. The owner of the barbecue stall gave her only 1 bottle, and he poured himself a cup of ale with hers. He raised his cup to welcome her back, and he was afraid that she would drink too much. The other drinkers at the barbecue stall also raised their cups to welcome her back, but they didn't forget to curse the person above. Zhong Lizi felt a bit tipsy after drinking half a bottle of ale. Otherwise, why did the dreadful owner of the gaming parlor greet her on her way back to the apartment? Why did that eccentric guy open the shutter door and ask her gingerly if she wanted a card with the high right of access? After taking a bath, she stood in front of the mirror in the bathroom and looked at her hair that had been dyed silver again, thinking that it was a good thing that nothing had changed. But, was it true that nothing had changed? She was no longer used to the taste of the food rationed by the government. She wasn't used to the empty chair. She didn't need to take medicine to survive after eating. She had seen the morning sun, the sea of stars, and a different world. She picked up a towel and dried her wet silver hair. Then, she walked to the study room and picked up a book. She sat on the spot that Guy was used to sitting on, reading the book casually and glancing at the outside of the window once in a while. There was a corner of the night sky high above the window, where a few stars could be vaguely seen. "Which star are you on now?" She had already memorized all those books, so it was not interesting to read them. She returned to the soft chair and turned on the TV screen to watch the news like that guy. The content of the news was the same. The military fleet had to stop the purging of the space pirates in the regions around the Scorpion Tail Nebula. A sign of a space crack had appeared on a remote biological industrial planet, and the fleet was preparing to evacuate. All the space pirates should die. The space cracks had to be mended. The problem of the sea of dark matter had to be solved. "I will avenge you." She thought of this in silence. It was then that the door of the apartment was suddenly knocked on by someone. The person's finger tapped on the door, making a sound that was low and steady, with a smooth and comfortable rhythm. Whether it was the sound or the rhythm, there was a very familiar feeling. Zhong Lizi didn't even bother to check the surveillance. She rushed to the door and pulled it open. She saw a young woman in white clothing. This young woman had a pair of picturesque eyes and eyebrows, a nonchalant aura. Her short black hair looked like a patch of wild grass, as if it hadn't been trimmed for hundreds of years. In the next moment, a cat meowed in the apartment. Meow. Zhong Lizi spun around and looked in the direction of the sound. There was a display cabinet by the wall in the living room of the apartment, on which was a holographic picture of the lost little yellow dog. A white cat with long hair stood on the table and looked at the picture curiously, as if wondering what was going on. Chapter 903. Two dark nights came together, one riding on the other. A paralyzed man in the heavy snow was tearing apart the stomach of the sky in the air. There lay the stomach, the chestnuts and the fire, under the armor. One of the largest heads that has ascended to the pinnacle of madness. Excerpt from The Gale, by Gomer. The rain drifted down from the gloomy sky. It would look beautiful if it wetted the leaves and the grass, but it would look ugly if it wetted the stray dogs with nowhere to go and the garbage on the ground. Whether it was artistic or not depended on the viewer's mood at the time, but on the environment. This planet was very remote and heavily polluted. The protective shield could only provide the basic living conditions, but the circulation system was terrible. As a result, the environment here was terrible as well. It was rare for the people living here to produce a poet, but one could be an excellent one once in a while. It was the same for artists. The rainwater was very acidic, eroding the metal roofs. It was no wonder that the red pictures on the walls had faded so much in less than a year, looking as blurry as a stick. Cold Cicada was knocked away and landed in the rainwater. It realized what had happened after a moment of bewilderment. Cold Cicada took a look at its work, and then at Jingjiu lying in the rainwater, its eyes full of the same bewilderment. It had been a while since it came to this world, but it couldn't figure out why its mistress had become like this. Now that its master was here, it was ready to leave with him without hesitation. But why was its master behaving like this? Chirp, chirp. The snow girl's feeble and fearful voice rang out in the rainwater. She was covered by a piece of oilcloth she had picked up from somewhere, letting the rainwater hit her, making splashing sounds. If she were to lean on a stick at the moment, she would look like a lonely shadow in the cold river. Those invisible mosquitoes were flying in all directions as fast as they could, keeping an eye on the approaching enemies. Hundreds of raindrops split open and dropped to the ground like flower petals. Cold Cicada jumped onto the military traveling bag and pulled the zipper open slowly, exposing the young girl inside. Hua Xi's eyes were closed, her face pale. It was unclear if she was dead or asleep. Looking at the small face, the snow girl somehow felt a strong sense of vigilance. She opened her eyes and sat up slowly in the traveling bag. She looked at Jingjiu lying in the rainwater, then at the snow girl covered by the oilcloth, and then at Cold Cicada. She didn't scream the whole time, her eyes a bit blank. A very faint sound of friction rang out in the rain. Cold Cicada rubbed its claws rapidly, not because it was excited, but because it felt a great pressure. These people were either stupid or insane. Would they be the ones in charge of the clan in the future? It was raining everywhere on the planet, day side and night side. It was also raining in the shacks in the slums, but there was no rain falling in the sewers. There was only a smelly river that was getting bigger and bigger. Jingjiu opened his eyes and looked at the top of the dark sewer. His face was pale as he felt the intense pain in his head. His body was fine, but his consciousness was suffering from the incessant attacks of the inherited heaven sword. A somewhat cold but soft little hand reached over, landed on his head, and began to massage him. She knelt beside him. Her knees were covered in dirty water, but she turned a blind eye to it. She did look a little dazed. Crouching by the edge of the canal nearby, Cold Cicada looked around cautiously. The snow girl was on the other side of the canal, squatting in the shadow with an oilcloth draped over her body. She looked like an old man smoking a tobacco pipe while squatting at the entrance of a village. She was short to begin with, and she looked even smaller at the moment. No matter how dirty the oilcloth was or how dirty her snow-white face was, her eyes were still as bright as before, so she still looked adorable. The snow girl looked at Jingjiu cautiously, as if he were some dark energy that could infect her easily. Jingjiu raised his right hand and pointed his middle finger at her. This was a common gesture used by the two civilizations, and it was quite insulting. Yet, the snow girl didn't get angry, because she knew that was not what he meant. She had noticed the ring a while ago. Even though she was experienced and knowledgeable, she was still amazed by the ring's design, craftsmanship, and its power. As a result, she grew more vigilant. Jingjiu wanted her to help him deal with this ring. He was using Shen Yunmai's magic drug to control the discharge of electricity in his brain, which was to reduce the activity of his consciousness. At the same time, he relied on his powerful spiritual awareness to control himself so that the young female priest on the main planet wouldn't find him and attack him again with the information of the entire human civilization. However, the magic drug would be used up sooner or later, and it was impossible for him to maintain such a strong control over his spiritual awareness all the time. As such, he needed someone to help him get rid of the ring. The problem was that the surface of the ring was covered with 12 miniature formations, which were similar to gravitational fields and could block all kinds of forces. The most troublesome part was that the ring was a magic treasure of a high state, so he couldn't remove his finger from the ring at will. The snow girl gurgled twice while looking at him. Her voice was still feeble, even a bit pitiful. Back when she was weak after childbirth, she was severely wounded by her own daughter and driven out of the snowland. She seemed to be on the verge of death, but she still possessed the power of a dominator of the world. Later, she was locked in the sword jail of Aoyama and became a prisoner who couldn't see the sun, but she still looked down on the world. This was the first time that Jingjiu saw her in such a feeble state, and it was also the first time that he saw her scared. He felt a bit better by now, and he understood what the snow girl meant. The gurgling was a simple word, but it contained a great deal of information. It was like the dragon language in the legends. The snow girl spoke a long speech, which contained at least 3,000 words in the human language. The main idea was summarized in 3 sentences. What are you doing here? I don't want this world to discover me. There's a guy here who scares me a lot. As you know, it's a program. If it were someone else, they wouldn't be able to understand what she said, but Jingjiu was well aware that the snow girl was afraid of that young priest. If their deduction was correct, Chaotian was the last refuge left by the gods for the humans and a laboratory to deal with the sea of dark matter. The Snow Girl was the main control program of the laboratory and the simulation program of the opposing camp. In the language of the cultivation circle, Chaotian was an unimaginable heavenly treasure, and the Snow Girl was the true spirit of this heavenly treasure. Normally, the Snow Girl would never be able to leave Chaotian, much like how Qing couldn't leave the green sky mirror in the beginning, and Ping Yonka couldn't leave the All-in-One. Yet, that god didn't expect a genius named Jingjiu to appear in the universe. He had helped Ping Yonka leave the All-in-One, and Qing leave the green sky mirror, and he had helped the Snow Girl find a way to leave Chaotian. However, if all this was true, that God must have a way to control the Snow Girl, whether it was the source code or the data backdoor. Who would build a high-level virus laboratory and then ignore everything else? If the Snow Girl was the main control program of the laboratory, she must be a branch of the main control program of this world. Now that she had returned to this world, if she was discovered by the main control program, she could be rewritten by the other party, which would cause a huge problem. It was evident that the main control program of this world was that young priest. All in all, the Snow Girl was afraid of that young priest. That was why she hadn't shown up since she came to this world. No matter how hard Jingjiu tried to call her, he couldn't get any response from her. "I'll help you kill her, so you won't have any trouble in the future." Jingjiu didn't show any emotion when he spoke of killing the young priest. It was just that his voice was trembling a bit due to the persistent headache. The Snow Girl shot him a pitiful look as if to say, "How dare you say you'll kill her when you've been tortured by her?" No matter what, she was unwilling to expose her whereabouts and touch the ring for Jingjiu's sake. She was very displeased that Jingjiu would find her. "Without me, you won't be able to leave Chaotian. So you have to repay me. This is the cause and effect. Don't do nothing and hide like old Tan." Because of the severe headache, Jingjiu couldn't finish his words, but his gaze was fixed on her in the dark. "Otherwise, I'll inform her that you're here," he said. Crouching in the weeds by the sewer, Cold Cicada didn't dare look to the sides, thinking that it was like a fight between two kids and they would report it to their parents. After a moment of silence, the Snow Girl leaped to the front of Jingjiu and observed the ring for a long time. The inherited Heaven Sword formation can shield the information channel, so you don't have to worry about being discovered by her. Having said that, Jingjiu was about to set up the sword formation with all his might. The Snow Girl shot him a mocking glance and waved her hand to set up a high-level inherited Heaven Sword formation, then she grabbed his finger. An unimaginably low temperature occurred in the sewer. Cold Cicada kept on rubbing its paws, and the mosquitoes flew to a farther place hastily. The weeds were frozen into ice cubes in the blink of an eye, breaking into pieces as soon as the wind blew over them. In the next moment, the wind seemed to be frozen as well, turning into ice cubes when it landed on the dirty water. A thin layer of frost formed on the surface of the ring, and a colder energy had already infiltrated the ring. The cold energy could reach the places where the energy couldn't reach. The temperature grew lower and lower, and the objects moved more and more slowly, including the microscopic electrons. Those miniature formations couldn't withstand the temperature any longer, and had gradually died out. Staring at the ring, Jingjiu was certain that he had reached the critical point. He blinked his eyes a few times, and the frost fell off his eyelashes. The ring broke into countless small pieces. Jingjiu swallowed the broken pieces of the ring into his body as quickly as he could. The cold energy persisted, but the sword formation wasn't dismantled. The Snow Girl looked at Jingjiu with a strange expression in her eyes. Countless faint cracking sounds could be heard inside Jingjiu's body. They sounded like the raindrops falling on the leaves. Chapter 904. The pa sounds like raindrops were the sounds of the heavy particles bombarding the rings. Jingjiu didn't expect to destroy the materials of the rings in this way, but he had to make sure that the miniature formations couldn't be reconstructed. It would be safer if he could damage the materials on the atomic level. This was not the fighting style of the sword in Aoyama, nor was it the fighting style of the technology in this universe. It was more like using the materials of the body to the extreme. The Snow Girl didn't expect Jingjiu to have such a method, feeling a bit surprised. The problem of the rings had been solved for now, and he didn't have to worry that the young priest would find him and bombard his spiritual world with the information. The next problem he had to solve was the inherited heaven sword. The Snow Girl had noticed the green rope of light on Jingjiu's wrist intermittently, and she felt the sword will inside it was quite familiar. The program seemed to have sensed the Snow Girl's observation. It turned into countless sword lights and struck at Jingjiu's consciousness again. Jingjiu had a terrible headache. "Help me cut open my head and take out the sword," he said in a trembling voice. He had almost been subdued by the Grand Master of Aoyama and the young priest together. Without Jian Shilai, he had no choice but to sleep, just like the time when he killed the mother nest after his ascension. The difference was that he couldn't wake up on his own. He had to wait for Zhao Liu and Lu Shisui to ascend and discover the secret of this world and what had happened to him. Then, they would find him and wake him up. Now that he had the Snow Girl, he hoped to find a way to solve the problem once and for all. The Snow Girl shook her head. Back in the nunnery of the 3000 nunnery, she had learned the inherited heaven sword after a few glances. Her mastery of this sword style was much higher than Jingjiu's, but she couldn't solve this problem. A few drops of sweat slid down Jingjiu's face. It was unclear whether it was out of disappointment or pain, but they were actually water made of frost. She wiped the sweat off his face carefully with her sleeve. Looking at her eyes, Jingjiu could see nothing but confusion and bewilderment. It seemed that she didn't know what had happened on the 857 base and in the asteroid belt, and she had forgotten what had happened in the past. All she remembered was that she was the servant of Jingjiu. Jingjiu knew the reason. She was one of the clones of the priestess. That girl could descend at any time through the chip on the back of her neck, but this time, it took too long for the chip to transmit information to overload, causing damage to her brain. She could only rely on time to slowly recover. Jingjiu took her with him because she was still useful to him, although that use might be in the distant future. Another reason was that at the last moment, he saw her eyes. At that moment, other than confusion, there was even more fear in her eyes. Fear of the sudden arrival of death. "Turn me into her," he said to Shuejiai. Shuejiai understood what he meant. Since she could not find and erase the program from his consciousness, she could only use other methods, such as hibernation. Of course, it was not true hibernation. Instead, it was using the low temperature to suppress the strength of Jingjiu's consciousness, reduce his calculation speed, and control his spiritual world to a low-energy range. The program in his consciousness would also become less active and would not constantly try to control his body. The consciousness and the matter seemed to be two different worlds, but they could be connected at certain moments or in some extremely microscopic areas. Temperature was used to describe the intense movement of the microscopic particles. The two could be connected no matter if the temperature was extremely high or extremely low. As Jingjiu spoke, the cold intent from the broken piece of the ring came out from his mouth, turning into mist and falling onto the Shuejiai's face. The Shuejiai lowered her eyelashes slightly, and reached out her small hand to press against the center of Jingjiu's brows. After a long while, the dirty water in the sewers had gradually frozen and piled up. There was no longer any sound of wind. It was as quiet as the outer space. All that could be heard in the world was the sound of cold cicada rubbing its claws against each other. It would be frozen if it didn't create some warmth. She was surrounded by the inherited heaven sword formation, leaning against the wall covered in snow and frost. The puzzled expression in her eyes had turned into ice flakes, reflecting the sunlight. The Shwe pulled back her hand that looked like a small snowball, a tired expression in her eyes. After a long while, the ice in the sewers had gradually melted, rushing downward with the floating ice, giving off thunderous booms. Cold Cicada crawled onto Jingju's face, and bit at his broken earlobe with all its strength. Jingju opened his eyes and woke up after feeling a slight pain. He instinctively thought of the pain in his head, breathing heavily as he held his head in his hand. A few seconds later, he found that his headache was gone, and he had gradually calmed down. He slowly put down his hands, exposing his pale face. He let go of his hands very slowly. Looking at the dirty water drifting away like an iceberg, the expression in his eyes was a bit dull. He looked like an autistic person, but he also seemed to be living in another world. The green rope of light on his wrist was no longer flickering in and out of existence, existing steadily in the space. Its color was brighter, but it was not as agile as before, as if it had turned into a tangible object. The Shwe didn't look at him anymore. She turned around and came to the sewers, looking at the iceberg formed by the dirty water, her dark eyes full of bewilderment. If I were controlled by that female priest, would I become as stupid as Jingjiu? The more she thought about it, the sadder she felt. I'm so stupid. It's true. Back when he was in Chaotian, he had been thinking of coming out and going to a bigger world to take a look. Well, this world was indeed big, but he had forgotten about this possibility. The number one cultivator in the world was the number one cultivator in the world, but he wouldn't necessarily be the number one cultivator in heaven. As expected, he was no longer invincible. What should he do? It was then that the ice on the other side of the flower stream melted. She looked around blankly, and then walked to the front of Jingjiu, beginning to wipe off the remaining frost and snow on his face. Cold Cicada climbed to the top of Jingju's head and looked down at the scene, feeling quite sad. One of the two strongest swordsmen in the history of Chaotian had become stupid, and the other had become stupid. And this little girl, was he going to be the head of the family from now on? The atmosphere didn't last long. "Let's go," a voice suddenly bellowed. As time went by, the temperature rose, and the ice on the ground melted. The rain on the surface of the planet grew heavier, and the river in the sewers flowed faster and faster. The stink from the sewers grew stronger as well. Though Jingjiu couldn't smell the stink, he could capture the molecules and analyze them. Instinctively, he didn't like the environment and wished to leave. All Huashi could do was listen to him. She walked to the back of the snow girl and picked her up without hesitation. Cold Cicada was so scared that he almost died. The snow girl didn't respond to Cold Cicada's action. It seemed that she had no choice but to give up. Cold Cicada still had a lingering fear. He made a squeaking sound, motioning for Huashi to head toward the sewers with the snow girl in her arms. It was up to Cold Cicada to make the decision. It didn't take long for them to encounter some people. They were not the pitiful people who hid underground to avoid the war, but the survivors of the space pirates who had escaped to the underground after the purge of the military. Those pirates aimed all kinds of laser guns and old-fashioned guns at them, and there was a heavy projecting platform that had been unloaded from a pirate ship in a corner. The atmosphere was a bit ridiculous. Jingjiu, Huashi, and the snow girl in Huashi's arms didn't seem to see these people at all. As far as those pirates were concerned, the appearance of this group of people was even more ridiculous. Judging from the beautiful appearances of the young man and the young woman holding the doll, they knew that they came from an extraordinary family. How could they show up in the sewers? Looking at those guns, Cold Cicada rubbed its limbs, exuding a strand of energy. A powerful energy that seemed to come from the ancient times and shrouded the whole sewers. Those space pirates couldn't resist it in the slightest. They all fell to the ground in pain. Cold Cicada looked at the snow girl, asking her if she should subdue these pirates so that they could live in the underground for a long time. The snow girl didn't pay any attention to it. Cold Cicada looked at Jingjiu. Jingjiu looked at the sky like a poet. Cold Cicada pulled back its gaze, deciding that it wouldn't do such unnecessary things anymore. She kept walking forward while holding the snow girl in her arms. Jingjiu followed behind. Cold Cicada crouched on Jingjiu's shoulder, not even taking a glance at those space pirates who had fallen to the ground. Wherever the group of people passed, the snowflakes would fall down, and the temperature would drop rapidly. Those pirates were frozen into stiff ice cubes before they could make any sound and died. Those guns, the platform for shooting rays, and the treasured food of the pirates had all turned into ice cubes as well. The filthy sewers had turned into a sparkling kingdom of ice and snow, looking like a cold hell. Nobody knew how long this planet would be sealed off. The populace had accepted the fact after the 3 spacecrafts that had taken off without permission were shot down. In order to keep the planet sealed off for a long time, good logistical support was needed. A few transport spacecrafts carrying sufficient supplies landed outside the iron gates in the 3 directions of the city. The populace lined up to receive food and some daily necessities according to the numbers on their bracelet. The order was quite good. However, the rainwater falling down from the sky was a bit annoying. The rainwater was too acidic, so they had to wear a raincoat, but it was not easy to carry things while wearing a raincoat. The women reprimanded their naughty sons loudly, telling them to put on their hats properly. The men gathered together and discussed in a low voice the demise of the pirates and the reasons for all this. All of a sudden, the rainwater turned into snowflakes, drifting down from the sky. It wasn't the official winter yet. Why did it snow? The populace took off their hats and looked at the snowflakes in the sky, a smile on their faces. The nature of the snowflakes was the same as that of the rainwater, but because of their different forms, the snowflakes wouldn't corrode the buildings like the acidic rainwater and cause chemical burns to the human skin. In the dark wilderness, there were people walking away from the people who were collecting supplies, gradually moving further and further away from each other. The young woman was holding a dirty doll wrapped in an oilcloth. The youth walked very slowly, as if his footsteps were heavy, like a poet lamenting the hardships of the people. Chapter 905. The Stargate Base was an important residential planet for the distant ancient civilization more than 100,000 years ago. Its initial conditions were excellent, and its modification was thorough. After the recovery of the human civilization, this planet was one of the first to be restored. Corresponding to its status in the Federation of the Milky Way, the living conditions on this planet were among the top 5. It had 4 seasons and a beautiful and harmless weather. However, this was only applicable to the upper-class society on the surface of the planet and in Earth City. It had nothing to do with the communities on the underground levels. If the inhabitants of the Mingxian neighborhood were born and died here, they would have never seen rain or snow in their entire lives. As the dripping sound rang out outside the window, Zhong Lizi knew that it was not the sound of the raindrops, but a leak in a pipeline in the sky. She felt a bit relieved after having these messy thoughts. She took a deep breath and looked at the short-haired girl sitting on the other side of the chair. "Are you Zhao Liu?" she asked after comparing her appearance with the one in the books and the game. Zhong Lizi tried her best to behave as calmly as possible, or at least like a host, but she couldn't help but ask in a trembling voice. The long-haired white cat had jumped onto Zhao Liu's shoulder and crouched on it lazily. He turned his head slowly and looked around curiously and disdainfully. The short-haired girl asked nonchalantly, "Has he mentioned me to you?" The white cat, who was complaining about the shabby manor cave and the status of the immortal Jingyang, was none other than the Master White Ghost, the principal guard of Aoyama, whose nickname was Lu Ada. This girl with a picturesque countenance and messy short hair, as if she hadn't taken a bath for many days, was none other than the master of Shinma Peak, Zhao Liu. After hundreds of years of diligent cultivation, she had finally become the first ascendant among the cultivation practitioners of her generation. It was because Peng Lang didn't want her to leave first because of his wife. After leaving Chaotian, she found the bamboo chair like Jian Shilai and the others had done. She sat on it for a while and made a fairy book. Then, she headed in a certain direction as instructed by Jingjiu. Since she was chosen by the immortal Jingyang in her mother's womb, she had a very good fate. She didn't encounter any monsters of the sea of dark matter along the way, nor did she encounter tens of thousands of burning flying swords. She bumped into a pirate ship. Of course, this was not to say that Jingjiu's life force was too bad. He was also chosen by Dao Yuan Zhenren when he was still in his mother's womb. It could only be said that his life force was better than Jingjiu's. Moreover, Shuejiai had arrogantly killed monsters along the way and attracted that big monster. That pirate ship became Zhao Leia's first contact with this interstellar civilization, which directly caused her style to be completely different from the previous generation of ascenders. She directly declared her ownership of the pirate ship and ordered the pirate-turned-teachers to teach her about all aspects of the world. Her life as a pirate didn't last too long. It was because she saw the book and the game on the interplanetary network through the computer. In the next moment, she saw a scene in the news, in which she saw Jingjiu wearing a blue hoodie on the gangway of the Scorching Sun battleship. Now that she had seen Jingjiu, the pirate ship changed its course. However, before the ship arrived on the main planet, she saw another inconspicuous piece of news. A young woman named Zhong Lizi had returned to the Stargate base. She knew without thinking that something had happened to Jingjiu, so she ordered the pirate ship to head for the Stargate base. The Stargate base was located on the edge of the Federation, but it was very important. It had a complete defense system and was usually guarded by a fleet. No pirate spaceship had ever dared approach that part of the planet, to say nothing of breaking through it. However, life consisted not only of the distant battleships and the dazzling laser beams, but also of the short-haired young woman and the blood-red sword. The pirates didn't dare disobey her. As expected, the pirate ship without authorization triggered the defense system of the Federation of the Milky Way when it was 10 million kilometers away from the Stargate base, and it was chased by a battleship. As the pirates turned to look at the young woman in an attempt to get her next command, they found that the seat of the commander was empty. Zhao Leia had left the moment she was discovered by the defense system. She jumped into the dark and bottomless space with the thrusters on her back. She didn't care whether the pirate ship would be destroyed or captured by the battleship. It was because she had paid her private tutor that those scoundrels whose hands were stained with blood could live for a few more days. Nobody knew how long Zhao Leia had drifted in the dark and cold space, but it was not dangerous. It was because she was an ascended fairy woman, and she had many magic treasures and a white cat with her. Lu Ada, who had ascended with her, still retained the style he had when he was in Aoyama. He wanted to take a bite of the starlight as soon as he saw it. As soon as he took a bite of the starlight, he knew that he had truly come to the fairy realm. No matter what this universe meant to the human ascendants, it was indeed the fairy realm for him. He and the round turtle had fed on the starlight when they were in Chaotian. Nobody could convert the starlight more efficiently than the two of them. This real universe was full of stars, and each star was like a piece of bread made of fairy energy. It was truly wonderful. In a short time, Ada's cultivation state had improved again, and his efficiency in converting the light of the fixed star was equivalent to that of a super-tiny nuclear power furnace. As such, Zhao Leia had no reason to be afraid of him while holding him. Zhao Leia landed on the surface of the Stargate that day. She saw the praying hall in the distance, but she didn't go there. She jumped to the underground according to the information she had found on the Star Zone network and came to this apartment. She had flown in the space for a long time and made 2 jumps as fast as the shooting stars, so her clothes were dusty and her messy hair was obviously dusty, but she didn't notice it at all. Zhong Lizi didn't notice it either, because she was as beautiful as a painting, and her temperament was as otherworldly as described in the novels. She remarked sentimentally, "You are indeed his favorite female disciple." Zhao Lei said. I'm of the same generation as Jingjiu, so the Shima Peak is ours. Though she seemed calm, she actually had a hidden meaning, a hint of wariness. She had boarded the pirate ship after leaving Chaotian, and arrived here after disembarking from the ship. Everything here was still unfamiliar to her. She and Jingjiu had discussed it in Chaotian. They believed that the world after their ascension was not the fairy realm, but they didn't expect it to be such a place. Zonglizi was still nervous. She poured a cup of tea for Zhao Lei at a loss. Seeing the white cat in her arms, she thought of her identity and asked in a low voice, Are you Ada? Do you want to have a cup of tea? The dried fish at home have expired, so I've thrown them away. Zonglizi kept the food bowl and the cat food for a long time after the yellow cat left, and didn't throw them away until they expired. Thinking of the yellow cat in the painting, Ada understood what was going on. He meowed casually to indicate that he didn't need to do so. He looked at Zonglizi's chest again and decided not to jump up. He lay back in Zhao Lei's arms comfortably. What happened? Asked Zhao Lei. Zonglizi had thought about it for a long time. Hearing Zhao Lei's question, she told her the speculation. So we went to the main planet. After General Li finished talking to him, he left the main planet. Logically speaking, he should have chosen the military side, but if he was the one who broke off relations with the military, the College of Priests would have protected me instead of chasing me away, so it must be that. Zhao Lei paused in stroking the cat's hair. You've mentioned that person a few times. Who is that person? She asked Zonglizi expressionlessly. Zonglizi didn't know what to say. That person is that person. She is the female priest of the main planet in name, but her status is much higher than that, she said. Zhao Lei didn't pay any more attention to this question, saying, It looks like we asked him to choose a side, but both sides have problems. That's my guess, but I don't have any proof. My teacher doesn't know the reason either. This was what Zonglizi meant. Otherwise, she couldn't explain what had happened later. She suddenly thought of something and said uneasily, You shouldn't have come here directly. Many people must be watching me right now. Ada turned his head to look at the outside of the window and meowed once. The pipes in the sky should have been repaired, so it wasn't raining anymore. A few glowing specks could be seen in the dark and gloomy street. Zhao Lei uttered to indicate that she knew what he meant. There were indeed a lot of people watching the apartment. One unit of the opposite apartment building had even been cleared out. Many special Zhong soldiers wearing light armor occupied the high ground. There were 13 long-range weapons aimed at this window, ready to attack at any time. What was even more shocking was that there were 2 more synchronous satellites in space, continuously monitoring this place. Ada continued to lie in her arms lazily. Zhao Lei stood up while holding Ada in her arms. She looked around and asked the closed bedroom door, Has he lived here before? She didn't expect Zhao Lei and that devil cat to care so much about it. She thought that they were the same kind of people as Jingjiu. She got up and introduced the apartment to Zhao Lei with a self-mocking smile. This is my bedroom, and he lives here, but he doesn't sleep much. He spends most of his time sitting on the soft chair, reading the news and watching the computer. Zhao Lei was taken aback. She didn't expect him to change so much. He didn't close his eyes while lying on the chair, but read the news and watch the computer. Her gaze moved back and forth between the study room and the soft chair. She felt a strong sense of longing for him again, sighing, I haven't seen him for many days. I wonder how he is doing right now. Zhao Lei came to the window and fell silent while looking at this strange world. I haven't seen him for 500 years, she said. There was a building on the opposite side of the apartment building. It was not a high building, and the rooms inside had been leveled and turned into a temporary command center. A dozen military officers were busy working at the workbenches in silence. Dozens of elite soldiers in armor sat silently by the wall, waiting for orders. The target has appeared. As a shout rang out in the communication system, The people looked at the light screen and saw the short-haired girl by the window. The short-haired girl lifted her head and looked at them. Pa! Pa! Countless cracking sounds rang out. The surveillance equipment aimed at the apartment building had all broken into pieces. Chapter 906. Zhao Leia had discovered the existence of those monitors a long time ago, but she didn't intend to pay any attention to them. It wasn't until she said, 500 years later, that she walked to the front of the window and sensed those gazes on her, and the spiritual awareness, that she suddenly felt annoyed. The sword wills broke through the air and destroyed all the monitors. She calmed down a bit, but it didn't mean that the matter was over. The red light illuminated the dark street, like the setting sun on TV, drawing the attention of many people. The boss of the night market, who was preparing the barbecue, followed the gazes of the crowd and looked back, wondering in surprise what had happened. Because of the praying hall, the military didn't try to kill her again, but they didn't relax their surveillance on her either. A combat group had set up a temporary headquarters in the building across the street since the day she came back to the apartment. They didn't expect that a short-haired girl, who was obviously suspicious, would show up instead of Jingjiu. More unexpectedly, all the monitors had been destroyed as soon as the surveillance on the target started. Pa! Pa! The cracking sounds rang out like a rainstorm. The precise photosensitive devices and the automatic control system were all damaged, losing their functions. It was a bit chaotic. An angry voice rang out in the communication system. What's going on? Where's the target? Nobody answered the question. It was quiet in the headquarters. The target of their surveillance had already arrived. Seeing the short-haired girl who had appeared in the headquarters, the people were stunned speechless. In the next moment, someone came to their senses. A dozen heavy guns were aimed at her along with the electromagnetic buzzing and the friction of the machinery. The atmosphere in the building became exceedingly tense. Yet, Zhao Lei didn't feel this way. She walked to the front of a soldier of the special forces wearing a light armor and took a heavy gun from his mechanical arm. This was a dangerous action, but she did it casually, as if she were picking up a piece of meat from a hot pot with a pair of chopsticks. The meat should be picked up when it was cooked. It was a matter of course. The soldier didn't make any move. It was unclear if he was confused by this feeling of being reasonable or because he couldn't resist due to his instinctive fear. Countless gazes fell on the gun in Zhao Lei's hand, making the atmosphere even more tense. Zhao Lei had seen guns on the pirate ship, but she had never seen such a powerful weapon equipped by the military. After observing it for a while, she plugged the muzzle with her left hand and pulled the trigger. Her movements were also very casual, as if she was eating hot pot. With a loud bang, green smoke rose and then gradually dissipated. The barrel of the heavy gun twisted and cracked, as if a rose had bloomed. Zhao Lei took back her left hand and looked at it. There was an extremely small wound on her palm, revealing a small piece of sparkling and translucent skin. This kind of gun was indeed powerful, almost equal to a full-force sword strike from a warrior in the initial stage of the Broken Sea state. Confirming this, she threw the gun to the ground like a piece of trash, looked at the people in the building, gave them a silent warning with her eyes, and left. Everyone looked at the heavy gun on the ground, and then at the dusk that had suddenly appeared outside the window. They thought to themselves, what the hell is going on? You went to warn those people? Asked Zhong Lizi while looking at Zhao Lei, who was closing the window. If Jing Jiu were to encounter such a situation, he would definitely leave immediately and not deal with those people. No, it was impossible for him to enter such a situation. Zhao Lei was different from the ascendants of the previous generation, including Jing Jiu. Though she had started learning as soon as she came to this world, she was more used to learning while learning, rather than hiding for a few days with the computer in her hands like those old guys. For instance, she was interested in the cultivation levels of this world, so she wanted to take a look at them in person. and she dared jump into the bottomless space with the thrusters in her hands before she knew what was going on in this world. Would the immortal Tan dare to do so? Would Jingjiu dare to do so? Let's study it a bit. Zhao Lei walked back from the window. Something dropped on the ground, giving off a crisp metallic clanking sound. That heavy firepower firearm used physical ammunition. It was very destructive, but it didn't affect her much. Only a few alloy fragments fell into her hair. Well, though I know you people don't need it, would you like to take a bath? Asked Zhong Lizi uncertainly. Okay. Zhao Lei also wanted to take a bath to relieve her mental fatigue. She agreed readily and walked into the bathroom. Zhong Lizi came before the bathroom door, intending to tell her how to use the shower and the difference between the hair conditioner and the body lotion. I'll stay here for a few days, Zhao Lei's voice came out from the bathroom. Okay, said Zhong Lizi after being taken aback a bit. Jingjiu had said that Zhong Lizi was his anchor in this world. As far as Zhao Lei was concerned, Jingjiu was her anchor in all the worlds. After coming to this world, she wanted to find Jingjiu as soon as possible. As such, this apartment was very important to her. It was evident that Zhao Lei didn't use the shampoo and the body lotion, because she came out of the bathroom 1 minute later. She had probably rinsed herself with hot water. The fairy ladies had no impurities. They were as clean as the lotus leaves washed by the rain after being rinsed with water. The apartment was filled with a faint scent of freshness. Thinking of what Zhong Lizi had said earlier, Zhao Lei sat on the other end of the soft chair and turned on the TV screen, watching the news like Jingjiu. After the news was over, it was time for the fat loss exercise. She couldn't help but raise her eyebrows when she saw the women twisting, jumping, and twisting their bodies out of shape, grinning awkwardly even though it was a strenuous task. Like Jingjiu, Zhong Lizi couldn't understand it either. Zhong Lizi sat on the other end of the chair while holding the white cat. Seeing the changes in Zhao Lei's expression, she found that Zhao Lei resembled Jingjiu a lot. As Zhao Lei was taking a bath, she didn't allow Ada to follow her into the bathroom. He felt bored, so he jumped into her bosom. Thinking of his status in that world, Zhong Lizi was as nervous as Yuan Chu was in the beginning. Her fingers touching Ada's body trembled a bit. Yet, she was someone who had raised a cat. Though Little Yellow Cat had been gone for a long time, she hadn't forgotten how to do it. She rubbed Ada more and more smoothly, feeling more comfortable and snoring. Hearing the snoring that sounded like the faint thunder, Zhong Lizi's nervousness had dissipated a great deal. She behaved more casually now, though she was still a far cry from Ping Yongka, who dared pick up a cat by its neck. Do you want to look up some information? Thinking of Jingjiu's daily routine in the first few days, Zhong Lizi took out the silvery notebook from behind her and said to Zhao Lei, "This is made by Jingjiu. It's very useful and safe." Zhao Lei took the notebook and turned it on. She thanked Zhong Lizi and turned off the TV screen to look up some information. She got up with Ada in her arms and brewed a cup of tea for herself. Then she found 2 packets of frozen buns that hadn't expired yet and asked Ada if he wanted to eat them. Ada rolled his eyes at her in delight. Zhong Lizi tossed the frozen buns into the dustbin. As she came back, she saw the images on the computer. She stood behind it and watched curiously after getting permission from Jingjiu. Zhao Lei was looking up all kinds of guns, mechas, battleships and so on, all of which were related to the military. The more she watched, the more uneasy she felt, wondering if this person was really like what was written in the previous novels. It was then that the screen of the silvery computer suddenly turned black, and a line of words appeared on it. "Who are you?" The street lamps outside the window had been lit up. A sound could be vaguely heard in the distant building, which should be the sound of the soldiers retreating. It was quiet in the apartment. Ada stopped snoring. He stared at the screen of the computer. His pupils narrowed to the size of rice grains, revealing a lethal intent. Zhao Lei looked at the line of words on the black screen expressionlessly, giving no response. According to Zhongli, this computer was built by Jingjiu himself, and it was well encrypted and protected, so it would be difficult to hack into it. Who was this person then? The lines of words suddenly disappeared, and a video window popped up. On the other side of the screen was a handsome young woman in a military uniform. "This is Colonel Ran," said Zhongli. "She is Jingjiu's secretary." The Ran family was under a great deal of pressure due to the explosion of the resort planet. Soon after, something even more serious had happened in the Scorpion Tail Nebula. As Ran Handong thought the storm was coming, everything had suddenly returned to normal. However, there was no more news about Jingjiu. That person had returned to the main planet, and Zhongli was expelled from the Priest Manor. Ran Handong didn't dare investigate anything, and she didn't even dare contact Zhongli. All she could do was wait in silence. She had suddenly received a notification from the data terminal that the computer had been turned on. She connected to the computer hastily using the digital mark left by Jingjiu. She thought she would see Zhongli, but she didn't expect to see a strange face. She was certain that she had never seen the face before, but she found it familiar for some reason, especially the short black hair and the distinct black and white eyes. She felt she had seen it somewhere before. She asked the person on the other side of the screen, "Who are you?" No sooner had she asked the question than she remembered that she hadn't seen this face in reality, but she had seen it many times in the novels and in the game. She left the workbench and came to the front of the window. Looking at the floating military vehicles moving back and forth below the building of the military headquarters, she wondered what had happened to this world. Why did the people in the novels appear in reality? It took her a while to calm down. She returned to the workbench and turned on the video interface. "If Zhao Liu is a real person and you are her, please come with me. I have something to tell you," she said to the person on the other side of the screen. Chapter 907. Ran Handong led Zhao Liu into the hidden network, but they didn't enter that room. Instead, they had a secret conversation on the wheel. Zhongli stood behind Zhao Liu, while holding Ada in her arms, observing the entire conversation. As the information of the two was combined, Jingjiu's current situation had a vague shape. In order to avoid being found out by the other party, the conversation was over soon. Zhao Liu called out the star map and found the Scorpion Tail Nebula. After looking at it for a while, her line of sight fell on the asteroid belt by the edge of the galaxy beyond the fog. The information provided by Ran Handong was limited to this point, nothing more. "That side is blocked. Nobody can go there," reminded Zhongli. It was true that even though Zhao Liu was an ascended fairy woman and could travel across the Milky Way while holding Lu Ada, she still couldn't pass through the warped hole. All the military needed to do was to close the entrance to the warped hole of the Scorpion Tail Nebula and isolate the two sides. Closing the entrance to the warped hole of the Scorpion Tail Nebula would have a significant impact. It had only happened a few times in the history of the Federation of the Milky Way, and those times were when the monsters of the Sea of Dark Matter were in danger. There was no news about the invasion of the Sea of Dark Matter, meaning that Jingjiu must be there. "I'll wait for him here," said Zhao Liu. Seeing her expression, Zhongli asked curiously, "Aren't you worried?" "Not really," replied Zhao Liu. Zhao Liu and Ada stayed in the apartment for a while. If one thought about it carefully, one would have many interesting associations. For instance, would this apartment become another post station for the ascendants in Chaotian like that bamboo chair? The next day, Zhongli was not as nervous as she was at the beginning. She could hold the cat freely and look at Zhao Liu directly, so she could observe more things. Zhao Liu was quite similar to Jingjiu, but there were still many differences. For instance, she didn't like reading books that much. She didn't go deeper into this world after she had grasped the general situation of this world through the computer and television. She didn't ask to use the library of the new institute, and she had no interest in studying astrophysics and number theory. Though she wasn't a talkative person, she was still more talkative than Jingjiu. She would even chat with Zhonglizi about some meaningless matters, such as romance novels, movies, and games related to romance. There was another big difference between her and Jingjiu. Although she didn't need to, she would still eat, and she was obviously curious about the food in this world. Sensing her gaze, Zhonglizi couldn't help but laugh out. She put the plate in front of Zhonglizi and went to get a new plate. These were all food distributed by the government every day. According to the regulations, there was a certain amount of room for change, so eating one more was not a big deal. Looking at the glue-like and rubbery food on the plate, Zhao Lei furrowed her brows slightly. She gave the food a 0 in terms of appearance and aroma. She picked up a small plastic spoon to scrape some of the food into her mouth and tasted it, and gave a negative score in terms of taste. "This civilization is of a lower level," said Zhao Lei earnestly while turning her head to look at Ada. No matter how close Zhonglizi was to those on Jingjiu's side, she was nevertheless someone who had grown up in this civilization. As such, she couldn't help but feel uncomfortable upon hearing this. "Let's go and have supper," she said. They had to pass a street corner on the way from the apartment to the barbecue stall in the black market. An eccentric person, Mr. Dan, lived in an electronic shop with a rolling shutter door. Zhonglizi was fully aware that people like Zhao Lei didn't need the permission, and Ada didn't need the pet biochip. Yet, she led them into the rolling shutter door and installed the new bracelets and chips on them. After leaving the electronic shop and passing by the gaming hall, they arrived at the bustling market. It was unclear whether it was a black market or a night market. The aroma of the barbecue from the electronic ovens permeated both sides of the street. The two girls and the cat sat down at the stall and ordered a bowl of mixed starch jelly, waiting for the grilled eggplant to be cooked. As a celebrity in the Mingxing community, Zhonglizi drew a great deal of attention. Zhao Lei, who had an extraordinary temperament, and the long-haired white cat had also aroused much speculation and imagination. The night market had gradually grown quiet. Besides Zhao Lei and Ada, nobody knew that a few satellites had been set up in the deep part of the night sky above their heads and in the space of the Stargate base, monitoring all the details of the night market. And nobody knew that the long-range weapon systems of 2 battleships had been activated and were aimed at the center of the Earth, ready to fire the dreadful laser weapons at any moment. The light brown ale was served, and so were the unappealing grilled green peppers and the king of barbecue, the grilled eggplant. The unique aroma of the mixture of carbon and meat and organic and inorganic substances drifted along both sides of the street of the night market. It was absorbed by the molecular capturing devices and sent to the laboratories of the battleships in the distant space. In the end, it didn't trigger any alarm. Zhao Lei picked up a piece of eggplant with the chopsticks skillfully and ate it, and then picked up another piece and fed it to Ada. Ada put the eggplant into his mouth. He didn't need to chew it to know that the grilled eggplant was a bit overcooked. He smacked his lips twice and spat out the eggplant to the bottom of the table. He meowed at Zhao Lei in a serious manner. This civilization was indeed of a lower level. Having suffered 2 blows in a row, Zhonglizi felt both frustrated and frustrated. She had no other choice but to employ the most powerful weapon on their way back to the apartment, to take Zhao Lei to have her hair dyed. For some reason, Zhao Lei didn't reject her suggestion. After sitting in the barber shop for a long time, Zhonglizi looked at her chestnut-like red hair in the mirror, feeling satisfied. Every color had its own beauty. The reason she liked this new hair color was that the red chestnut-like color was similar to the color of the thoughtless sword. The girls cared more about this color, like the relationship between the hair color and the handbag, or the relationship between the shoes and some accessories, or the color matching. "I've dyed my hair red before, but it's ordinary, not as beautiful as you," said Zhonglizi enviously while looking at Zhao Lei's red hair. Before Zhao Lei ascended, she stepped out of the manor cave and came to the front of the cliff on the Shima Peak. Listening to the cries of the apes all over the mountain, she suddenly thought of a certain someone hundreds of years ago. She cut her waterfall-like black hair shorter, and painted the shortened waterfall into a blooming wildflower. Then she painted her hair chestnut-like red flower in the middle of spring and blazing flame, giving off a breathtaking sense of beauty. Such a red chestnut-like color was eye-catching, but it still lacked a certain flavor compared to a certain object. That object was the red soup of the hot pot. The red and green peppers were bobbing in the soup, looking like the rocks that were sometimes submerged by the tide and sometimes exposed to the surface of the ocean. The fresh bean curd, the frozen bean curd and the bean curd skin, the mutton with the skin on and the fresh mutton cut by hand, the snow-white fat beef and the spicy coriander beef, the tripe with tripe and flour tripe, the head of lettuce and the sliced green bamboo shoots, the mushroom platter and the pine mushroom, and all kinds of fresh ingredients were dropped into the soup one after another. They were scooped up by the chopsticks as soon as they were cooked, realizing their value perfectly. Zhong Lizi had never seen someone who could eat as much as Zhao Liu and was good at eating hot pot. She was flabbergasted while holding the large bowl and chopsticks in her hands. She didn't come back to her senses until all the ingredients in the hot pot were scooped up. She started to search for the remaining ingredients. After 7 or 8 hot pot meals, Zhao Liu had learned the general knowledge of the Federation of the Milky Way. She ended her course hastily and learned the general situation of the Federation of the Milky Way. Even if Jingjiu could come back from the Scorpion Tail Nebula alive, he wouldn't go back to the apartment on the Stargate base to ensure his safety. It was because the military would send many people to keep an eye on him. If she wanted to find Jingjiu, she should find the broadsword King Chao Yuan, the immortal Tan and Jian Shilai first. "We'll eat spicy hot pot tonight." Standing by the window, and looking at the dirty water dripping down like raindrops from an unknown pipe in the distance, she said, "We'll go to the main planet tomorrow." Neither the immortal Tan, Chao Yuan nor Jian Shilai had left any traces in this universe. Since she couldn't find them, it was better for her to find that person. Eating spicy hot pot and going to the main planet had nothing to do with each other. In fact, they were completely different. However, since Zhao Liu had said it, she would do it, regardless of whether it was going to the main planet or eating spicy hot pot. It hadn't been long since noon. The permanent stars that occasionally revealed their true appearances drifted away from the cracks in the sky, leaving behind a patch of darkness. Zhao Liu was to go to the food market to buy some vegetables and internal organs. It would be better if she could get some blood. Regardless of whether it was pig's blood or duck's blood, as long as it was blood, it could be used to make spicy hot pot. The difference between spicy hot pot and spicy hot pot lay in the utensils and the way to eat it. It was like the path toward heaven, and they walked on different paths. However, no matter which path they walked on, they would reach the same destination at the end. The dim light shone on the long street and the recycled energy paper swaying in the wind. The rustling sound was full of desolation and coldness. The Stargate base had 4 seasons, comfortable in winter and summer. Moreover, it was deep under the ground, so the extreme weather was rare. The so-called coldness and desolation were actually more of a psychological feeling. Along with the rustling of the waste paper, a military officer appeared on the street, blocking Zhao Liu's way with a wooden board in his hand. "General Chun is on his way here. Please wait for a while." A sword was carved on the wooden board, which was the sword amulet of the mountain gate of the Aoyama sect. Zhao Liu didn't care about the wooden board. What she cared about was that the other party knew that she was about to leave, which meant that they were still monitoring her. She had told those people with her eyes not to bother her the other day. It was indeed troublesome. She didn't heed the military officer, and continued walking toward the food market. The military officer had no intention of making way for her, asking, "Are you sure about this choice?" Zhao Liu halted her steps and tilted her head to look at him. She didn't look cute, because her face was devoid of any expression, as if she were looking at a dead person. "Pa!" A tiny blue flame burst out on the alloy cliff wall a few kilometers high. It was the unique phenomenon of the electromagnetic exhilarating ring. The killer in overalls had used this kind of gun to strengthen the electromagnetic gun. This kind of gun was extremely powerful. After Jingzhou caught a bullet with his bare hand, his power was similar to that of a flying sword in the Broken Sea state. In the distant buildings and in the gloomy sky, at least a dozen blue flames flashed, indicating that a dozen electromagnetic guns had fired at Zhao Lei at the same time. The faint pa sounds turned into booming thunders in the street. A dozen white turbulents bloomed around her like flowers, looking like a dozen cotton candy. The bullets fired by the electromagnetic guns had no way to penetrate the sword formation. She had been studying the weapon system of this world in the apartment over the last few days, and it seemed that her calculation was correct. The military officer didn't show any astonishment on his face. "I'm sorry," he said to her. A cat's meow suddenly burst out in the quiet street. A white light beam dropped down from the sky, passing through the crack of 100 kilometers and landing on the street, enshrouding Zhao Lei's body. Zhao Lei turned over her right hand and an ancient bronze mirror appeared in her hand. She aimed it at the light beam. Chapter 908. Many people had been monitoring Zhong Lizi in secret since she returned to the Stargate base. After Zhao Lei showed up, the intensity of the monitoring had increased to an unimaginable level. The military had launched a few satellites to monitor the underground street, and the battleships were on standby at all times. Nothing had happened, and the two sides were in a peaceful state. It wasn't until Zhao Lei intended to go to the main planet that she was shot by a laser cannon. The milky white light beam broke through the atmosphere and headed toward the underground after brushing past the edge of the cliff in Shou-Er City. A middle-aged man who was mowing the grass in the suburb of Shou-Er City was startled. The welders working hard on the alloy cliff had almost fallen off the cliff. Fortunately, they were tied with a strong safety rope. Back then, Jingzhou had been attacked by the long-range electromagnetic gun and then by the laser cannon of the battleship, but these events had happened at the same time that day. It meant that this was not a test, and those people really didn't want Zhao Lei to go to the main planet. The speed of light was the fastest speed in the universe. Nobody could defend against the laser cannon after it had been fired, not even Jingzhou. The reason he could evade those laser cannons in front of the praying hall was that he had been monitoring the command system of the Scorching Sun battleship and had reacted before the laser cannons were fired. Since Zhao Lei couldn't do it, she couldn't make a prediction. Though her body had been tempered by the fairy energy, it was still different from that of Jingzhou. She couldn't deflect the energy of the laser cannons as much as possible. How could she deal with it? She had her own warning system. She was not referring to Ada, who was hiding in the dark corner of the street, but to someone else. Facing this light beam, Zhao Lei came out from the green sky mirror with a flip of her hand. The hardest object in Chaotian was still the hardest object in this universe, like Jingzhou's body and the green sky mirror. It should be noted that the green sky mirror was the last thing Jingzhou used to sharpen his sword. More importantly, the green sky mirror was a bronze mirror to begin with, and the purpose of the mirror was to reflect light. The white light beam landed on the surface of the green sky mirror, making no sound. When the laser landed on the surface of an object, it would take some time for it to accumulate energy before it could deal any damage. Zhao Lei's wrist sank slightly, and her sleeves were slightly scorched. Several fine cracks appeared on the ground where she was standing. Just the light pressure alone could bring about such a huge impact. Even if she wasn't serious in her studies, she could easily calculate how terrifying the power of this laser cannon was. Whoosh! The surface of the green sky mirror produced a great deal of light dusts and shot out in a ring shape, dispersing the whirlpools formed by the bullets of the electromagnetic guns. A white light beam, a bit thinner than before, shot out from the surface of the green sky mirror. It passed through the dirty water dripping down from the alloy cliff wall soundlessly and brushed past the grass by the edge of the cliff in City. Under the shocked gaze of the middle-aged man, the white light beam broke through the clouds ignited by the twilight and arrived in the space, hitting the black battleship squarely. There was still no sound, but countless balls of flames rose up and scattered in space like the sunset. Soon, they turned into countless fireballs and floated miserably. The black battleship began to burn as its hull began to slowly disintegrate. Many scorched corpses could be seen in the wreckage of the battleship, the wounded screaming noiselessly, and some soldiers who had put on their spacesuits in a hurry and fled to the distance. All this had happened so fast that the space defense system of the Stargate base hadn't been activated in time, and nobody had time to react. The middle-aged man pushed the weeding machine and saw the burning battleship in the sky getting clearer and clearer, his mouth opening wider and wider. The ear-piercing alarm and the terrified screams of the populace rang out in City. Soon after, the commotion spread to other cities and the ground. Many Maine preachers and servant girls ran out from the pagoda-like praying hall, looking at the burning sky. The female priest dipped her hand in the clean water in the ceramic basin and started praying silently with her eyes closed. The battleship burned more and more fiercely in the space. Even the street on the underground was illuminated a bit. The most important factor was the angle. The battleship was suspended right above the crack. The fireballs looked like the real sun, bringing the sunlight of noon to this street that was rarely seen. Zhao Liu put away the green sky mirror and looked at the officer. A flash of sword light flashed in her bright pupils. The faint warm sunlight on the street was replaced by the bright blood-red sword light. The officer's body was cut into a dozen pieces and fell to the ground with a thud, creating some electric sparks, which were soon extinguished. The pieces of the corpses were the combination of the alloy skeleton and the bionic material, and the blood was the white liquid. It turned out that this officer was a biochemical man. Zhao Liu pulled back her gaze and looked at the buildings at the end of the street. The military had dismantled the command center in the buildings that day, but many people were still left in the neighborhood. The blood-red sword light illuminated the long street and disappeared in the distance. Then, it kept on lighting up. Every time it lit up, it looked like a setting sun had appeared. Those snipers had all been slashed to pieces by the thoughtless sword. Soon after, some soldiers were killed, lying in the pool of blood. Nobody could escape the pursuit of the thoughtless sword, no matter if they were in the armor or the escape rooms behind the alloy walls. Among the true swords of the Nine Peaks, the thoughtless sword was the fastest. It had an unimaginably formidable destructive power in a street fight. She had been studying the military tactics of this world, and it seemed that her research was quite effective. As long as she waited a little longer, she would be able to kill all those people. A cat meowed in a corner of the street. Ada walked out from the shadow and jumped into her bosom, rubbing against her chin. "I know you can, but it's not necessary." Zhao Liu didn't say anything. Ada looked at her with a hint of fear in his eyes. Though his cultivation state was not lower than Zhao Liu's, he was still afraid of her, just like how he was afraid of those two brothers back then. Hu Chaotian was not afraid of Zhao Liu. After Jing Jiu's ascension, nobody could control her or suppress her murderous nature. Over the years, the blood-red thoughtless sword had reaped a great many lives in that world. Neither Guangyuan Jinren nor Zhuoruzhui could do anything to her. It wasn't until Zen Master came to Oyama one year and had a long talk with her that the situation got a little better. Zhao Liu put away the thoughtless sword and continued walking forward while holding it in her bosom. The food market was a part of the black market. Both the barbecue stalls and other food stores had to purchase the ingredients here. She had come here a few days ago. The people took good care of her because they knew she was a friend of Zhonglizi. It wasn't until they saw the laser cannon and heard those horrible screams that day that the food market became deathly quiet. Everybody's gazes were fixed on her, full of fear, but they didn't dare flee. Zhao Layer didn't pay attention to those gazes, nor did she feel any artistic emotion. She walked to the vegetable stall and bought some green vegetables. Then she came to the meat stall and nodded satisfactorily after smelling the bloody scent. She asked for some internal organs and pig blood. Having bought the ingredients and seasonings, she came back to the apartment building. It took her a dozen minutes to finish the dinner. In the end, the hot oil was poured on the food, and a spicy aroma filled the air. Holding a bowl of white rice in her hands, Zhong Lizi looked at the quivering blood clots on the top of the bowl with the chopstick. Thinking of what had happened that day, she asked fearfully, "Is this human blood?" Zhao Lei said, "I'm not a devil man of the deviant sex, so I'm not interested in human blood. And it's not tasty anyway." Having said that, she started eating the meal in a serious manner. Zhong Lizi and Ada eyed each other, deciding not to think too deeply about this statement. After the meal, Zhong Lizi went to wash the dishes and pots. Zhao Lei sat on the soft chair with Ada in her bosom, meditating. Having finished washing the dishes, Zhong Lizi took a bath and started reviewing the lessons. What she was studying was not the textbook of the University of Stargate, but the knowledge of the distant ancient civilization at the College of Priests. For some reason, the praying hall hadn't retracted their statement. It was getting late at night. Zhong Lizi bade Zhao Lei good night and was about to go to bed. Zhao Lei opened her eyes and asked, "Come with me?" "Sure," said Zhong Lizi while rubbing her wet hair with a towel. The next morning, a thunderclap broke out in the underground neighborhood. How could there be a thunderclap in a place devoid of rain? In fact, it was the sound of the sword formation. Zhao Lei had set up a sword formation in the apartment building and asked Ada to unleash some of the power of thunder in it. From that moment on, the apartment building had become the palace on the top of Bihu Peak. Many residents were woken up by the thunderclap. They came to the window and happened to see the thoughtless sword leaving. The bright red light looked like the morning glow on the TV screen. The owner of the barbecue stall was cleaning the greasy stains on the ground with his aching body. He lifted his head to look at the sky, feeling speechless. The owner of the gaming parlor turned to the side of the street and looked at the sky while holding onto his fat waist due to excessive alcohol and women, clicking his tongue while holding the cigarette in his mouth. Mr. Dan walked out slowly wearing an apron. Looking at the fading red light, he took off his glasses and wiped them. The crowd was fully aware that Zhong Lizi wouldn't come back after leaving this place. She might die out there and never come back. It was a good thing. Chapter 909. The thoughtless sword landed on the grassland by the edge of Shou-Er City. The green grass seemed to be ablaze, but soon recovered its original color. Zhong Lizi's face was pale. This was the first time she had ridden a flying sword. This unprecedented experience was too exciting. After a while, she calmed down and walked forward hastily while holding Ada in her arms. Zhao Lei walked on the grassland with her hands folded behind her back. She didn't look to be walking fast, but she had become a small dot in the distance. As the two of them disappeared, a middle-aged man pushed open the door and walked out. Thinking of the scene he had witnessed earlier and the light beam the day before, he rubbed his eyes reflexively. Zhong Lizi pointed the way. Zhao Lei led her to the University of Stargate. They took a look at the path under the ginkgo trees, went to the hotel and enjoyed the soft chairs on the balcony, went to the art gallery and the fire-passing pagoda to see the god on the wall paintings, and finally went to the large lake and stood among the reeds for a while. It took them less than half a day to travel around Shou-Er City. They came to the ground via the floating elevator and boarded the floating train that was sent to pick them up, heading to the praying hall in the field. They passed through the gray sky-like curtain and arrived at the deep end of the praying hall, where they saw the tranquil female priest of the Stargate. "Greetings, teacher," said Zhong Lizi after bowing to the female priest. Then, she sat to one side and started making tea. Kneeling on the futon, the female priest of the Stargate said to Zhao Lei, "Many people died yesterday. Zhao Lei uttered while stroking the cat's hair, but she didn't give any further explanation. I only hope that my choice is correct and beneficial to the humans. Having said that, the female priest took out a scroll and handed it to Zhao Lei. The scroll contained the relevant information about the Hua family and some more confidential information about the history of the female priest. She had a high status among the priests and knew some important information. However, she didn't tell Jingjiu about it due to the rules of the praying hall. Of course, Jingjiu had predicted it. She had betrayed the praying hall by handing the scroll to Zhao Lei. Betraying the praying hall didn't mean betraying her belief. It was because she believed in God, not the system of the praying hall or the one on the main planet. However, this choice was still a huge blow to her spiritual world. Her face was pale under the reflection of the flower petals in the Celadone basin. Zhao Lei took the scroll, looked at it, and said to her, "Your choice is not wrong. If there is a God in the world, it can only be him." Zhonglizi brewed the tea and pushed it between the two of them on a wooden tray. The female priest of the Stargate picked up the teacup and took a sip, feeling a bit bitter. Thinking of the deaths in the underground block last night, she asked, "Will there be more people like you coming here in the future?" Zhao Lei wasn't sure when Peng Lang would be able to solve the problem at home, so she said, "There should be another 2 or 3 this year." The female priest of the Stargate sighed, "Is the war about to start?" "That depends on the other side," Zhao Lei said. "But no matter what, the final victor will be us." The female priest said softly, "I'm arranging for the unmarked spaceship, but it will take some time." Zhao Lei didn't drink the tea, saying, "No need. I'm here for something else." Upon hearing this, the female priest was baffled, thinking that she was a student of God and was almost omnipotent, and that she didn't need a spaceship at the moment. What else could she do for her? Zhonglizi thought that Jingjiu couldn't pass through the warped black holes and had to take the scorching sun battleship to go to the main planet. How could they go there if they didn't take the spaceship? "I'll leave 3 letters for you." Zhao Lei dipped her hand into the clear water in the Celadone basin and touched the 3 flower petals with her fingertips, sending a sword awareness into each of them. The sword awareness had gradually disappeared, and so had the ripples on the surface of the water. The 3 flower petals looked more vivid, and the marks on them were the 3 family names. If the person has the family name of Liu, you give this letter to him. If the person has the family name of Zhua, you give this letter to him. If the person has the family name of Tong, you give all 3 letters to him, and then listen to his arrangement. The main campus of the University of Stargate was on the surface of the planet. The military department and the laboratory of the Federation were also here. The huge mecha, the Thunder God, had been repaired last year after it was severely damaged in the battle against the Mother Nest. According to the progress of the repair, the Thunder God should have been repaired a long time ago and incorporated into the new fleet to continue the experiments on the battlefield at the edge of the galaxy. However, due to Jingjiu's attempt to operate the Thunder God from a distance, all the related procedures had been stopped, and a thorough inspection had been carried out. The engineers couldn't find the cause of the problem even though they had worked overtime. The permanent star hung in the sky like a small snowball, shedding a scorching light that was not too warm. It was lunchtime. Dozens of small mechas flew off the surface of the Thunder God. As the engineers and the military officers were about to leave for lunch, the ground suddenly quaked violently. Everyone turned around in shock, only to see the underground laboratory's gate slowly opening. The Thunder God mech's helmet shot out a pale green light, and countless heavy metal components let out a buzzing sound. The crystalline engine below the mech shot out extremely beautiful flames. Someone had actually secretly activated the Thunder God mech. "Shut down the engine in an emergency." "What's going on?" "Inform the fleet. Nobody is allowed to leave. Isolate the campus. Bring me the confidentiality agreement." The familiar conversation broke out around the well again. The problem was that the thunder god didn't stop the engine this time. It left the ground along with a loud boom. The extremely hot flames shot out through the underground tunnel and evaporated thousands of tons of seawater in a flash, forming a large patch of clouds on the distant prairie. The thunder god rose up slowly from the well, and then accelerated toward the sky, bringing along an unimaginably strong wind. It broke through a large patch of white clouds in the sky and headed toward the atmosphere. The professors, engineers and military officers of the military department of the University of Stargate were all dumbfounded as they looked at the scene in the strong wind while clutching the railings tightly. What was going on? Why had the thunder god been activated by itself? Where did he get the right to do so? Why didn't the defense system of the Stargate base respond? Why did those battleships outside the atmosphere seem to be dead? In comparison to the huge body of the thunder god, the cockpit hidden among the countless metal components was very small, like a hair. If one didn't observe it carefully, they wouldn't be able to notice it. Zhonglizi stood in a corner of the cockpit while holding Ada in her arms. She was held tightly by the self-restraining device, but the loud boom and the dreadful quaking outside the window and the image of the Stargate base grew smaller and smaller, making her feel very nervous. Ada meowed once, indicating that he would be able to survive in the space as long as he was here, so there was no need to worry. Comforted by the principal guard of Aoyama, Zhonglizi calmed down a bit. Looking at the planet that looked like a hollow ivory ball outside the window, she swallowed uneasily. The scroll drifted to her. She came back to her senses and put it into her backpack hastily. Then, she looked at Zhao Liu in front of her, her eyes full of admiration and yearning. Sitting in the pilot's seat of the holographic projection, Zhao Liu looked at the data on the light screen with a focused and calm expression, looking like a veteran pilot with decades of experience. The system of the Thunder God had been hacked into by the silvery computer, and then completely controlled by it. It was Ran Handong who had given it the right of access. As a loyal follower of that person, her father, Ran Donglu, was not affected by the event of the Scorpion Tail Nebula. On the contrary, he gained more power in the military. Later, she, as the secretary of Jingjiu, used the power to deal with Zhao Lei. The data flow on the light screen had gradually changed. A patch of fog could be vaguely seen in a certain area, which was the hidden network in the deepest part of the interplanetary network. Ran Handong was very cautious. She didn't use the data exchange with Zhao Liu in that seemingly hidden and safe room, but on the Ferris wheel she had built herself. She said to Zhao Liu, "The data of the sailing course has been transmitted, and the information shielding system has been set up. But don't activate it recklessly. If you cut off the connection with the whole world, you won't be able to determine your position in the world. If you become a drifting object in the space, it will be very dangerous." No sooner had she said this than her face suddenly displayed a cautious expression. Then, it broke apart into tiny pieces. The same thing happened to the room with the Ferris wheel. It broke apart into the most basic pieces of data, falling down like raindrops. However, there was no real ground under the Ferris wheel. It was a chaotic abyss. Nobody knew how long they would fall. Was it forever? It was not a real death, but the dissipation of the data. Ran Handong was the most outstanding cloud ghost in the Federation of the Milky Way. Who in the network could erase her data in such a short time? Looking at the rain-like pieces on the light screen, Zhao Liu didn't show any change in her expression. She suddenly felt a tingling sensation on her finger, and then found that Ada's hair was standing on end, as sharp as a sword. Looking at the light screen, Ada seemed to be looking at a distant place. His pupils shrunk slightly, as if he was facing a formidable foe. The pieces on the light screen had gradually stopped, and then turned into a line of words. "Cocoon Breaker, you have crossed the line." Chapter 9-10. The words were written in a square font, or in other words, they were nothing more than a mechanical combination of strokes. They looked like a voice, devoid of any inflection or emotion. Ada had guessed who the other party was, so he acted as if he was facing a formidable foe. Zhong Lizi had guessed who the other party was, so she felt extremely nervous. Yet, Zhao Liu didn't give any response. She moved her line of sight away from the words and started designing the course on the star chart, monitoring the data of the propulsion units of the Thunder God mecha, and repairing the remaining data sent by Ran Handong. She even asked the machine in the cockpit to make a cup of tea for her. The words on the light screen had broken into pieces again, revealing a young woman in a bathrobe. She looked at Zhao Liu curiously, as if she was trying to guess what she was feeling at the moment, wondering if she really didn't care about her or if she was trying her best to calm herself down. After finishing all the trivial tasks, Zhao Liu took a look at the starry gate that had turned into a small ball outside. She used her naked eyes to make sure the course was correct. She picked up the delicate teacup and looked at the young woman in the bathrobe on the light screen, asking, "Can you control the mecha physically?" Jingjiu had asked the same question. The young woman priest on the main planet gave the same answer with a faint smile. "I can only do what I can. If you can control this mecha from a distance, ask it to stop. If you can control the battleships from a distance, ask them to fire the cannons." Zhao Liu continued calmly while looking at her. "If you can't do anything, wait for me to come and see you." This young woman priest, who was addressed as "that person" by the priests and the important figures in the Federation of the Milky Way, had a mysterious origin and background, but Zhong Lizi had learned a great deal from that scroll. She suddenly felt the backpack on her back was a bit heavy, meaning that the scroll was in it. Looking at Zhao Liu in silence, the young woman priest suddenly said, "I'll wait for you." Having said this, a gust of wind seemed to blow over the light screen, ruffling her black hair curtain and the thin bathrobe. The flower petals on the bathrobe flew up like butterflies flapping their wings, turning into countless pieces and vanishing into nothingness. In the next moment, some new data appeared on the light screen. It should be Ran Handong trying to reconnect. Zhao Liu ignored him for the time being. She picked up the teacup and took a sip, looking at the dark universe outside the window. The Thunder God had an unimaginably huge body. It looked like a huge mountain on the Stargate base, but it became tiny in the vast universe, looking like a toy. The wreckage of the warship not far away looked like a half-burnt matchstick. Even further away, 2 warships were silently retreating. For some reason, they did not launch any attacks on the Thunder God. The 3 petals floated slowly in the clear water. Once in a while, they would meet and drift towards the edge of the basin. They were silent like 3 battleships. The words carved on the petals could be seen clearly, but the true message was hidden in the sword intent and could not be seen. The female priest pulled back her gaze and looked at the blue sky outside the skylight of the praying hall and the white airflow left by the mecha of the Thunder God. Imagining the scene in the space at the moment, she felt sentimental. Many people knew that Zhao Liu was on the Stargate base, and nobody wanted her to go to the main planet, but she went there openly by piloting the Thunder God. In comparison to Jingjiu, who waited quietly for him to be found, her response was evidently more straightforward. This was probably what one would call the imposing manner. A gray and white battleship seemed to be traveling slowly in the space. A general stood in front of the large light screen in the command room at the head of the battleship. The general wore a black overcoat, as if he would blend into the background of the universe outside the window. The large light screen was divided into hundreds of scenes, each of which showed a dead person. The cyborg officer on the street had already turned into a puddle of mud. Dozens of corpses of the snipers were scattered on the rooftops of the buildings, in front of the windows of the small buildings, and on the rusty cliffs. There were more corpses in other places. These people were all killed by the thoughtless sword. Some of them had their heads separated from their bodies, and some had a small hole in the center of their eyebrows. No painful expression could be seen on their faces. It seemed that they had no time to react. Many corpses were drifting in the dark space. because they were affected by the explosion of the battleship, their deaths were much more miserable. An officer walked to the back of the general in the black overcoat and reported, "Commander Chen, the news channel of the 7th Sector has obtained the permission from somewhere and started to broadcast the relevant news." The general in the black overcoat was Chen Ye, the current commander of the Star Corps fleet, and also the stone man on Mount Chen Wu. From General Li to Shen Yunmai to Jian Shilai, and now to him, the position of commander of the Star Corps fleet seemed a bit inauspicious, but he didn't care about it. Looking at the scene of the huge thunder god passing through the wreckage of the battleship on the news screen and listening to the announcer's words about the terrorists, Chen didn't show any emotion on his slightly aged but well-defined face. "Those from Aoyama are indeed ferocious people," he said calmly. Chen body and Dao heart were as firm as a rock, so he wouldn't be moved by the news. Yet, he had the same sentiments as the female priest of the Stargate, feeling that Zhao Leia's trip was indeed impressive. After the significant event in the Scorpion Tail Nebula, the ascendants like Chen Ye had returned to their respective positions, waiting for the day when Jingzhu died and was discovered. Unexpectedly, someone from Chaotian had come out so soon. The moment she appeared in the underground apartment, the whereabouts of Zhao Lei had been observed by the whole universe. Everybody knew that she was the little girl mentioned by Jingzhou in the novel, so they were very cautious. According to the arrangement, Chen Ye left the front line and was to go to the Stargate to contact this little girl. Unexpectedly, she suddenly wanted to go to the main planet, and it was even more unexpected that the military would react so violently and stupidly. The price they paid was the dead people in the underground neighborhood and the wreckage of the battleship outside the atmosphere. Chen Ye was aware that something was amiss. "Should we pursue her?" the officer asked. "I'm made of stone, but I'm not stupid," said Chen Ye expressionlessly. "Let's go to the number 3 forward base." Regardless of what that junior Zhao Lei had done and what attitude she had toward Jingzhou, she was nonetheless a disciple of the Aoyama sect. Chen Ye didn't want to confront her directly like some people wanted, because the Grand Master of Aoyama was above them. There were 6 planets on the permanent star Wang Yi. The third planet, which was suitable for human habitation and had been modified, was the number 3 forward base. A crack in the dimensional space had appeared on this planet last year, and some living beings were infected, resulting in the deaths of thousands of humans. Of course, something more important had happened behind the scenes. Chao Yuan was right on the planet when the nuclear bombs dropped down. Then, he pulled out his iron broadsword and killed a huge battleship before disappearing. Chen Ye brought the battleship to this place in order to find him. He was inspired when he saw Jian Shilai die in the galaxy beyond the fog that day. He was determined to find this junior who used the broadsword and fight him. The question was, where was Chao Yuan? Others might not be able to find Chao Yuan, since he was an ascendant of the new generation, and they were not familiar with his style. Even if they read the book written by Jingzhu dozens of times, they still wouldn't be able to find him. However, Chen Ye was different from the others. He had someone to provide him with the information, and more importantly, his cultivation method was similar to Chao Yuan's golden body. As such, he was certain that Chao Yuan hadn't left this place. The planet closest to the permanent star on the right side of Wang Yi was extremely hot, and it was the same on the backside. The battleships of the latest model couldn't even get close to it, let alone land on the surface of the planet. The atmosphere of the planet had been blown away by the wind of the permanent star a while ago. As Chen Ye's feet landed on the magma-like surface of the planet, he didn't make any sound, and his black cloak didn't flutter a bit. This was the backside of the planet. The soft surface of the planet was slowly solidifying like plasticine. "You should have heard of me. I'm the stone man of Qin Wu Mountain. Come out, Chao Yuan." Chen Ye's voice was like the wind blowing over an empty mountain, echoing throughout the whole planet. Nobody responded to him. The whole world was like an empty mountain, devoid of any wind. Chunya continued, "You probably don't know what has happened yet. All I want to say is that Jingjiu is dead, and so is the immortal Qi Song. What happened in the past has nothing to do with you. All you need to do is think about the future of the humans." In a place that looked like a gentle slope, the semi-liquid surface of the planet protruded slightly and then flowed slowly, gradually turning into the shape of a large Buddha. Looking at the large Buddha, Chunya said, "If Jingjiu didn't lie in that story, I think the humans should need you." The lava-like rocks dropped down slowly. Chao Yuan opened his eyes and asked Chunya, "Who did you say was dead, Senior Master?" "Jingjiu is dead," said Chunya. "You're lying," said Chao Yuan. "Why?" asked Chunya. "How could Jingyang die?" Chao Yuan asked. "I'll show you something," said Chunya. Having said this, Chunya reached his hand into the dim light. The semi-liquid rocks on the surface of the planet solidified instantly, forming a passageway. A huge transparent coffin drifted over from the other end of the passageway. The huge coffin was decorated with flowers, koi carps and fairy cranes, seeming both real and illusory. General Li was lying in the coffin in silence, as if he were sleeping soundly. "What is this?" asked Chao Yuan. Chunya said, "This is the fairy remains of the immortal Chunyang." Chapter 9:11. That day in the galaxy beyond the fog, General Li was severely wounded by Jian Shilai's death shadow and was killed by Jingjiu using his own body as a cannon. His last words were to preserve his remains and the all-in-one that remained in it. Normally, his remains should be in the laboratory of the Science Academy of the Federation or in the military laboratory that he was familiar with. Unexpectedly, he was brought by Chunya. The fairy remains of General Li had an unimaginable value and a symbolic meaning beyond its value. It was unclear why Chunya did it, and whether those ascendants would object to it. But, why did he take out the fairy remains of General Li at this moment? Chao Yuan of course knew who the immortal Chunyang was, but he didn't expect this legendary ferryman to be dead the first time he met him. Looking at the remains of General Li in the coffin, Chunya said expressionlessly, "According to the time in Chaotian, I've ascended 9,000 years ago. He was my junior, but in fact, I've always regarded him as my teacher, or in other words, my spiritual leader. I even thought that he would never make a mistake and would never die." Chao Yuan understood what he intended to say, and uttered a Buddhist mantra. "Since he is dead, why can't Jingjiu die?" Chunya continued expressionlessly while looking at Chao Yuan, "Even though he is still alive, he is no different from being dead." Chao Yuan said, "I don't agree with this opinion. In my opinion, Jingyang won't die even if all of us are dead. But it's not important. What do you want to tell me?" Pointing to General Li in the coffin, Chunya continued, "Do you know how he died? Do you know what he said before he died?" The cultivation practitioners of the same generation as Jingjiu and his juniors in Chaotian had an inexplicable confidence in him. He would still be alive even if heaven and earth were destroyed, to say nothing of living as long as heaven and earth. It was a marvelous thing to say, but it was easy to understand. They had seen too many legendary deeds of his, but they had never seen him defeated once, and they all knew how much he cherished his life. Chao Yuan had guarded the wind and snow all by himself for many years, so he knew better than anybody else how powerful the Snow Girl was. Yet, if he had to judge whether the Snow Girl or Jingjiu would survive in the end, he would choose the latter. It was because Jingjiu would regard the former as an advantage for his survival. He didn't believe that Jingjiu would die, and neither did Zhao Lei. She didn't even seem to think about it. She placed the logbook into the storage box, turned on the projected screen, searched for a few signals, and connected automatically. Then, she saw herself on the news screen. More accurately, she saw the Thunder God Mecha on the news screen. In the dark background of the universe, the surface of the Thor's mech was covered with a thin layer of frost, as if it was shining with starlight. It was very beautiful, and also had an extremely threatening aura. That was not real frost, but the coating of particle bombardment after passing through the warp tunnel. The Thunder God Mecha was now in front of the Hyene Nebula. After passing through a few more warp spatial passages, it would arrive at the star sector where the main star was. For some reason, the military didn't block the news about the Thunder God Mecha. The TV stations in all the star sectors of the Federation of the Milky Way were paying close attention to this huge mecha, broadcasting the related news incessantly. In the beginning, the news media thought it was a conspiracy by terrorists to hijack the mecha. However, it was puzzling that the battleships of the military didn't launch an attack, either near the Stargate base or in the star sectors where the Thunder God mecha had passed. All they did was keep an eye on the mecha. As time went by and the Thunder God mecha got closer to the main star, the news media reported in a calmer tone. But the populace who paid close attention to this conspiracy grew more and more shocked, and more speculated. Was it possible that an important figure on the huge mecha had been taken hostage? Or, was there nobody on the mecha? Did the mecha have an artificial intelligence? On many forums on the interplanetary network, many users began to write articles based on this story. Their imaginations were even more bizarre than the real situation. The whole series of stories was named The Rebellion of the Huge Mecha. It was quiet in the cockpit, save for the deep and low electromagnetic buzzing and the deeper snores of a cat. It wasn't until Zhong Lizi's voice broke out. The wreckage in front of us was left behind from that incident. Zhao Leia looked at the space outside the window and saw the wreckage of the battleship. She seemed to have seen the scene where countless nuclear bombs had exploded and Jingjiu had rushed over as a sword light. The traces of the battle had disappeared in the space a long time ago, but Ran Handong had made a simulated scene for her. Zhong Lizi pulled back her gaze and read 2 more news reports, and then continued to study a star chart. There was a special star in the star chart. It had a high-mass companion, which created a long tail behind the star. There was a famous holiday star in this galaxy. A violent explosion had taken place on it many days ago. According to the information provided by Ran Handong, Jingjiu had been with a person named Shen Yunmai at the time, and the person named Shen Yunmai had disappeared after the explosion. Zhao Leia wanted to find Shen Yunmai, but it seemed to be a difficult task. As long as the black battleship was cut off from the outside world, it would become a black coffin drifting in the space. The universe was so vast that neither a divine animal like Ada nor the seemingly omnipresent surveillance network could find it. By the same logic, if the mecha of the Thunder God was cut off from the outside world, it would disappear in the vast space. Doing so would increase the risk, but it would also reduce the risk on the other side. Yet, Zhao Leia didn't do anything. The Thunder God was under constant surveillance by the other side. A few battleships were following the Thunder God in the distant space, and it was unclear when they would launch an attack. Even if they didn't launch an attack right now, it was unlikely that the other side would let the Thunder God arrive on the main planet under the watch of the whole world. Zhong Lizi didn't know what was on Zhao Leia's mind, feeling worried. The snoring suddenly grew louder. Ada was comforting her. "Don't worry. Even if this junk is destroyed, I can still take you to travel around." Zhong Lizi recalled many scenes in the novel, thinking that Jingjiu had basically never attacked and would be defeated once he did. She couldn't help but feel worried. Tens of billions of people in the Federation of the Milky Way were watching the huge mecha called the Thunder God on the TV screens. As the Thunder God got closer to the main planet, the populace in many parts of the universe became more and more excited to watch the show, but the populace on the main planet grew more and more nervous. The management committee and the administrative authorities had received many inquiries. In addition to the usual concerns, most of the inquiries were about when the battleships built with their taxes would fire. The populace with some common sense knew that the Mecca of the Thunder God couldn't possibly cause a devastating attack on the main planet. The problem was that the military and the government didn't give any response. The eerie quietness was truly frightening. It was like watching the setting sun and the shadow of the dark night engulfing everything. When would the street lamps be turned on? Ran Handong had no idea what the young woman named Zhao Liu intended to do and why she came to the main planet so openly. Looking at the Thunder God on the TV screen and listening to the heated discussion between the presenter and the two so-called military experts, Zhong Lizi felt bored. She turned off the TV screen and was about to go to bed. It was then that the door of the room burst out with a loud bang. Dozens of soldiers in light armor rushed in and surrounded her bed, the leader of whom was her brother. Ran Handong said to him earnestly, "If I can't sleep tonight, you won't be able to sleep for the rest of your life." Seeing her with a terrible expression, young General Ran pressed, "Have you been in contact with the Thunder God all this time?" Ran Handong said expressionlessly, "The people on the Thunder God are Jingjiu's men. If I remember correctly, our family and Jingjiu are allies." After the turmoil of the Scorpion Tail Nebula, the important figures in the upper class of the Federation of the Milky Way had learned the truth even though they didn't know the truth. This world had been ruled by the Cocoon Breakers, and they had to rely on the priests to maintain their current status. As a result, the aristocratic clans led by the Ran family and the important figures in the political circle were more loyal to Jingjiu, so they weren't purged. As a result, some of the former allies had become enemies. Young General Ran said while staring into his younger sister's eyes, "He's dead. I didn't see the will, so I'm still his secretary." Ran Handong got up and put on the military uniform, buttoning it up meticulously. She was fully aware that she would be arrested and tried in secret. For the aristocratic clans, the future and even the life and death of their children were not as important as the fate of their clan. When she died, her father might shed some appropriate tears, but that was all. It was then that young General Ran suddenly received a message. He felt both shocked and relieved. "Someone wants you to pick her up," he said to his younger sister. It was impossible for the Federation of the Milky Way to allow the huge Mecca of the Thunder God to arrive on the main planet, otherwise the populace would be scared to death by the dark night. The military base was located through the space passage of the Hyene Nebula. The weapon systems of dozens of black battleships had been activated, locking onto the Mecca of the Thunder God. They watched the huge Mecca of the Thunder God enter the base cautiously and nervously. Along with the sound of splashing air, the door of the cockpit was opened. Zhong Lizi walked out from the cockpit with a black backpack on her back. Ran Handong came before her and looked at her with a faint smile, saying nothing. Zhong Lizi shrugged and said with an innocent expression, "Sorry, I'm back." Ran Handong looked behind her and asked, "You're alone?" There was no one in the cockpit, and no cat. Of the 9 swords of Aoyama, the lone sword was the fastest, and the thoughtless sword was the fastest. Everybody was well aware of the difference between the two swords. How fast was the thoughtless sword? After Zhao Liu ascended and became a fairy lady, even the most advanced surveillance satellite couldn't detect its trace. All that could be seen in the atmosphere was a flash of red light. The flash of red light expanded as the speed of the sword slowed down, merging with the morning sunlight in the sky. It was hard to tell them apart from each other. The front gate of the ancient castle opened slowly, welcoming the people in the morning sunlight. The sunflowers in the painting were awakened by the morning sunlight, as if they had become more energetic. Zhao Liu stood in front of the painting and looked at it intently while holding the white cat, wondering what Jingjiu liked. Extremely rhythmic and steady footsteps that were beyond mechanical rang out. The young woman came to her side and said while looking at the sunflowers in the painting, "This is a replica. The original painting was hung in a banker's house. The little kid was about the same age as you when she copied it." She was not by the hot spring that day, so she was still wearing the bathrobe with floral patterns. She turned her head to look at Zhao Lei and added, "I meant the appearance." "Are you the computer left by the distant ancient civilization?" asked Zhao Lei. The young woman was taken aback. Over the years, even if someone had guessed her identity, they would show her a great deal of respect, not daring to ask her directly. Even Jingjiu had only talked in riddles with her. No one had ever been as straightforward as Zhao Lei. "You're indeed different. I've seen some female cocoon breakers, but I've rarely seen someone as reckless or domineering as you. Where does your confidence come from?" "I have a cat. Do you have one?" asked Zhao Lei. The young woman looked at the white cat in her arms and said with a faint smile, "It's nothing but a modified animal." Chapter 9:12. Ada didn't say anything, which meant that he didn't meow or howl. He just looked at the girl in silence. His pupils narrowed to the size of beans, and his tail drooped under Zhao Lei's arm like a sword ready to be drawn out of its sheath. An extremely faint and cold energy came out from his white hair, passing through the gloomy passageways and the thick stones in the castle, spreading to the surroundings. No sound could be heard, but many things had changed. All the surveillance equipment in the castle, the objects with chips, the street lamps on the lawn outside, and the satellites outside the atmosphere had all lost their effectiveness. The girl said with a slightly changed expression, "You're much stronger and more daring than in the stories." Having finished his work, Ada ignored her and buried himself in Zhao Lei's bosom again to sleep, but his ears were pricked up. The young girl didn't pay any more attention to him. "How did you guess my identity?" she asked Zhao Lei. Her identity was one of the most important secrets of the human civilization. Nobody knew it except for the Ascendants. Zhao Lei hadn't seen any Ascendants since she came to this world. So how did she figure it out? It had something to do with the scroll provided by the female priest of the Stargate, but it was more of an analysis. Zhao Lei didn't like to calculate like Jing Jiu and Tong Yan, but it didn't mean that her deduction ability was weak. "Hua, she should be your doppelganger," said Zhao Lei. It was also the reason why she chose the Hua family as the meeting place. The girl turned around and walked toward the other end of the gallery. The sound of her hard soles on the harder stones couldn't cover her crisp and determined voice. "In a sense, all the humans in this world are my doppelgangers." The two of them walked through the long gallery and arrived at the courtyard behind the castle. The well-trimmed green trees in the courtyard had a kind of mechanical beauty, but the tables and chairs in the middle of the courtyard were made of logs with natural patterns, which formed an extreme contrast. The seemingly hard wooden chairs were not hard at all, and their curves were in line with the human body. It seemed that the designer had done a lot of research on them. Sitting on the chairs, one could hear the birds chirping in the courtyard. It was a good position for birds to pay homage to the phoenix. A blue bird appeared out of nowhere and landed on a branch of a holly tree. "You asked me to wait for you. Now that you are here, what are you going to do?" The girl poured herself a cup of black tea, mixed some milk in it, and took a sip before continuing, "Or do you want to listen to my story first?" Zhao Lei was not used to drinking this kind of tea. She took a glance and then looked away, saying, "Okay." Thus, the young girl told the story in its entirety, not concealing anything. Zhao Lei listened attentively, and so did Ada. He almost couldn't help but jump up a few times. After the story was told, the courtyard was quiet for a long time. Even the chirping of the birds seemed to have disappeared. The blue bird on the branch looked at the sunrise in the distance, thinking about something. "There's really no right or wrong in this matter, only a standpoint," the young girl said to Zhao Lei. "Everyone has their own standpoint and opinions, such as me and you." Zhao Lei said, "I don't have a definite opinion yet." "Is that so? You have countless ways to come to the main planet to see me, but you chose to do it in such an open and above-board manner. That's because you know very well that those ascendants are in conflict and don't know how to deal with you. You want to intensify their conflict and at the same time test the influence of the Aoyama sect in this world. More importantly, you can also try to sow discord between me and those people, or at least plant a shadow in advance. The young girl said, "You are a very clever child, and I admire you very much." Zhao Lei didn't expect that she would see through her all intentions, saying, "You are very similar to him." The him she was referring to was Jingjiu, who had taken every possibility into account. The young girl put down the teacup in her hand and looked at the tea and milk that had merged into one, saying indifferently, "Because we are essentially the same existence." Zhao Lei said, "That's why I don't understand why you refuse to cooperate with him. As I said earlier, everybody has their own standpoint, so they have their own ideas. But I'm different." The young girl went on calmly and earnestly, "I'm created by him, so his standpoint is my standpoint, and his last wish is my idea." Of course, he was referring to that God. And it's not a good thing to have too many ideas. The young girl looked up at the sky above the courtyard. As her gaze fell on the sky, a complicated star chart appeared there. It was very bright and clear, and even the morning sunlight couldn't cover it up. Chunya is in the 6 stars to the right of the king. He should be looking for the monk who uses the broadsword. What is he doing at the moment? He will tell Li Chunyang's last words with tears and snot, and he might even drag Li Chunyang's corpse to the monk. Well, it shouldn't be the ancient saying of carrying the coffin and fighting. He intended to use Li Chunyang to persuade the monk to join his team. What did he say? He probably said that you're guarding the snowland in Chaotian. Do you think you can watch the humans die here? If this were the case, Chaotian would become a shelter instead of a cave where fires could be hidden. Do you think what he said is convincing? She suddenly pulled back her gaze and asked Zhao Lei. Zhao Lei said after some thought, "It seems very convincing." The young girl continued looking at the sky and a dim permanent star on the star chart, saying, "That's the number 857. Xingju should have already known about it. He's hesitating and struggling, but he will give up in the end. It's not because he is not familiar with Jingjiu, it's because a scholar like him has no way to put himself above the whole human race." After that, she turned to another permanent star and said, "The great sorrow monk is fully aware that Xingju will give up, but he's still worried. It's because it's not safe for him to do so. As such, he's hesitating whether he should kill Xingju or not." Looking at the permanent star, Zhao Lei found it familiar. Chunya, Xingju, and the Great Sorrow Monk were all famous figures in the history of cultivation in Chaotian. They were the stone men of Chen Wu Mountain, the sages of Yamatsai, and the founding monks of the Guoqing Temple. No matter how confident she was fully aware that she was no match for these seniors. She was alarmed, her sword wills fluctuating slightly. For some reason, the emotion in her eyes and brows grew a bit gentler. Look, everybody has their own ideas and believes that they are right. And the more powerful the humans are, the more resolute their ideas are. It's not good. It's like those superhumans in the movies and games. When the two sides have a dispute, the humans will be destroyed before the sea of dark matter arrives. And such a thing has indeed happened in history. Looking at the white cat in her bosom, the young girl continued in a mocking tone, "Some annoying things have happened in history, like this little guy. They have brought me a great deal of trouble after they came to this world. It took me a great deal of effort to get rid of them." The situation didn't calm down until Shun Aoyama ascended. Ada buried his head deeper, pretending that he hadn't heard anything. The young girl continued, "The relationship between you and Jingjiu is not like that of a master and a disciple, or a couple. I think it's more like that of a comrade." Zhao Lei agreed with this statement. The young girl said, "Shun Aoyama and I are also comrades in arms, and we are the only unified will of this world. There is only one way for you to change all this. That is, to replace us with Jingjiu." Zhao Lei said, "They are indeed similar. I can give it a try. The young girl said, unfortunately, I can't be killed. As such, Jingju didn't try to do so. How can you do it? She was the light of the human civilization, existing wherever there was information. She could be understood as omnipresent, or she could be understood as having a great many duplicates. The only way to kill her was to destroy the current world and set the human civilization back tens of thousands of years, like what those pastoral sects claimed. Zhao Layer gave the same answer, I can give it a try. The young girl said, Jingjiu is not a human being, but you are. This was something beyond the concept of betraying a country or a race. Neither love nor admiration was enough for a cultivation practitioner with a clear Tao heart to make such a choice without hesitation. There must be some other reason. As long as he can live, I can live as well, said Zhao Lei. She had spoken of her own path. The meaning of this statement was clear, as was the choice Jian Shilai had made before his death. Jingjiu said that he could represent the humans, but the young girl thought that the humans would not be willing to be represented by him. Jian Shilai cast the first vote, and Zhao Lei cast the second. Zhao Lei suddenly asked, Have you ever wondered why he wrote the story about the path toward heaven? Don't try to force the meaning, said the young girl. All he wanted to do was summon Shin Oyama, Li Chunyang and the others. That's only a part of it. Zhao Lei got up and said, It seems that many things in that world and this world are connected to each other, like the monsters in the snowland, the underworld, the sea of dark matter, and many more. What you and the great grandmaster have done is no different from what Taiping Jinren has thought. This correspondence might be the so-called destiny in the unseen world in the eyes of many people, but it is meaningless repetition for him. What he hates most is repetition. As such, he will write down what he has experienced and tell you what they will do in advance so that you won't bother him. But you still have to bother him. Don't you think it's really annoying to do so? What she said was full of annoyance. As she said the last sentence, she raised her eyebrows slightly, indicating that she was indeed annoyed. The young girl pressed, Is it because you find it annoying that you don't want to do anything? Zhao Lei said, He has done many things, but it's up to him whether he wants to or not. It's not up to you to make him want to. In the story called The Path Toward Heaven, Jingju didn't care about the affairs of the mortal world, and the Grand Master was merciless, but he had almost died a few times. He had been cut in half at the waist at the West Ocean once. He had tempered the fairy book in the Guoqing Temple once, and he had used his magic to patch up the sky when the world was destroyed by Taiping Jinren. It seemed that he had done all of these things because of Lien Sanyue, but he had taken some risks nonetheless. It's not up to him whether he wants to or not. It's not about which specialization he will apply for, what occupation he will take, or what kind of wife he will marry. It's more important than freedom, it's the existence itself. But it doesn't matter. The young girl didn't get up. According to my calculation, he will die in about 100 days. I hope you can calm down by then, child, she continued after a sigh. Nobody knew where Jingjiu was at the moment, but she was aware of Jingjiu's current situation. To avoid being discovered by her and being controlled by the inherited heaven sword, Jingjiu must have entered a deep sleep and turned himself into a gloomy ball of flame, trying his best not to illuminate any place or be seen by anybody. However, such a gloomy ball of flame could be extinguished easily. It could be extinguished by a sigh. Let's pray then, said Zhao Lei. It was not a threat, but a statement. Besides, I don't like to be called a child, she continued. The young girl said with a faint smile, You are still children to me, no matter how old you are. She was a child, so she needed to be taken care of. She could throw a tantrum, but she had to be obedient in the end. Oh, that's a good girl. Zhao Lei walked toward the outside of the ancient castle without saying anything more. After passing through the gloomy passageway where the portraits were hung, it became brighter and brighter. Ada opened his eyes and looked at the bright place, where a blue bird seemed to be flying past. Zhao Lei left the ancient castle. She didn't ride her sword, but took the first floating train to the special district of the capital. The thread-like space elevator in the distance and the space station outside the atmosphere glittering like gems didn't interest her at all. She was like a schoolgirl going on a trip with a cat in her arms. She even attracted the attention of several enthusiastic people along the way, but they were scared away by her indifferent expression. After arriving at the special district of the capital, she found a fairly clean tea house and ordered a pot of tea that was fairly elegant. Then she sat down by the window. The window was open, welcoming the dim light and the cool wind. The blue bird came with the wind and landed by the window. Looking at the strange world outside the window, Zhao Lei asked, "Can I take over the body?" The blue bird chirped softly. Chapter 9:13. This blue bird who dared fly freely between the ancient castle and the outside world, traveling even faster than the floating train, was none other than Qing. Since the green sky mirror had left Chaotian, she had to travel with it. However, what did Zhao Lei mean by this statement? Zhao Lei had deduced some possibilities based on the scroll given by the female priest of the Stargate. She was even more certain of this idea after her conversation with that person that day. It was a famous lie that all the beings in the world had spirits, but it had been proven many times in Chaotian that the heavenly treasures must have true spirits. Qing was the spirit of the green sky mirror, and Ping Yongka was the spirit of the All-in-One. If Chaotian was the laboratory of that god, and the snow girl was the spirit of Chaotian, could it be understood that the young woman who called herself Fei was the spirit of this world? It sounded a bit strange to regard the central computer of the human civilization and a great artificial intelligence as the spirit of the cultivation world, but it was not so hard to accept. The so-called possession was to let Qing invade and destroy the consciousness of that young woman and replace her as the central computer of this world to control it. If she succeeded, those space elevators that looked like wires, the space stations that looked like gems, the floating trains, the battleships and the strange world outside the window would all be under their control. It was true that Zhao Lei's idea was straightforward and domineering. After that guy ascended, she had cultivated in the Guoqing temple for 3 years and had some understanding of the Buddhist methods. She had a general understanding of what Taiping Jinren had done to the late emperor and why he had failed. Unfortunately, Qing gave a negative answer. She's too big. Qing didn't turn into a young woman. She was still in the shape of a bird, spreading her green wings to increase her persuasiveness. And she's everywhere. Zhao Lei understood what she meant. It was impossible to deal with the spirit of the whole civilization unless the other party was willing to shrink to a specific area and then possess her body in a split second. However, the other party had existed in the universe for more than 100,000 years, so it was impossible for her to make such a stupid mistake. Also, I prefer the term artifact spirit. It sounds more spiritual. Don't expect me to admit that I'm some kind of artificial intelligence. It sounds weird. Qing'er folded her wings and walked to the tea table. She picked up a small piece of food and swallowed it. She said vaguely, "How do we solve the problem of the dead man?" Hearing this, Zhao Lei's expression changed slightly. Even Da's white hair stood on end. Qing'er knew that she was wrong. Not to mention that they were by the window of a tea-house, even if they were at Shinma Peak, she would not be able to talk about such a secretive topic. Even Yuan Chu did not know about this until now. She quickly changed the topic and pretended to complain. "This world is really weird and uncomfortable. There are glass walls everywhere. I don't get lost, but I almost ran into them a few times." Ada meowed once, indicating that she could have come back from 10,000 miles away, but she had to fly around. She had no one to blame. "It's not easy to leave Chaotian, and I've set up so many sentry posts for you in the underground world. Now that I'm here, I can't have a good time touring around, Qing retorted. Ada meowed again, indicating that it was good enough to bring her out. A lazy white cat with long hair was talking to a green bird by the window, meowing and squeaking. It was a moving scene. Zhao Lei was even more attractive. She sat quietly in the chair, her eyes and brows as beautiful as a painting, exuding an air of nobility and indifference, until she uttered the next sentence, "I hate that damned old woman." She had many reasons to dislike that young woman, like the floral bathrobe and the hair that looked like a broken curtain. Because of her relationship with Jingjiu, it was understandable that she called her damned old woman. But she called her old woman because she had called her child a few times. Ada and Qing were startled by her sudden swearing, and then they were shocked by what she would do next. Sitting in the chair, Zhao Lei lowered her head and hugged her knees. She didn't say anything for a long time, nor did she do anything. Yet it was evident that her body was straining slightly, and she was very nervous. It was true that she was very nervous. She didn't relax until now. It was not because of the conversation, but because of another matter. She had destroyed that battleship, killed so many people, and snatched the Mecca of the Thunder God. She came to the main planet under the gazes of countless people. Though it was a magnificent act in the eyes of many people, it was actually for another reason. That young woman had calculated part of it. For instance, she wanted to know the status of the Aoyama sect in this world, and to intensify the conflict between the two opposing sides. More importantly, she wanted to know the attitude of this world toward her. The life and death of that guy would change the attitude of this world. Those ascendants hadn't shown up during the long journey, which gave her a bad idea. Was that guy really dead? It was true that she was very confident, and she had even more confidence in that guy. But it was well known that it was a completely new and strange world outside the window, and both she and that guy were strangers. Zhong Lizi asked her if she wasn't worried back in the apartment. She replied that she wasn't, but how could she not be worried? It wasn't until this conversation that she was certain that Jingjiu was not dead. The nervousness and worry hidden in the deep end of her Tao heart were released, and she turned into a feeble young woman sitting with her knees hugged. She hadn't been so feeble since many years ago. Seeing her body gradually relax, Qing and Ada eyed each other, feeling a lingering fear. Ada rubbed her face gingerly. Qing asked hesitantly, "Do you want to drink some hot tea?" Zhao Lei recovered after taking 2 deep breaths. She picked up the cold tea in the teacup and drank it up, finding it tasteless except for the tastiness of the tea. "The tea is good," she said. "It's better than the sticky stuff that old woman drank." Qing thought that she had inherited Jingjiu's style of drinking tea over the last few hundred years, and that both Gu Qing and Yuan Chu had been worried about the tea they drank over the last few hundred years. She couldn't help but feel curious that she thought the tea was good. As she was about to take a sip of the tea, she suddenly discovered something and disappeared with a flash of green light. Zhao Lei looked out of the window and found a floating car parked by the street, and 2 young women walked out from it. Ran Handong tidied up her military uniform and ascertained that there was nothing wrong with it. She took a deep breath to suppress her nervousness and headed toward the tea house, but she halted after taking a few steps and asked Zhong Lizi in a whisper, "Is it true?" Zhong Lizi sighed. "I've told you many times on the way here. It's all true." Was there really a world of cultivation? Ran Handong still thought it was incredible, wondering if the sceneries she had seen in the game were real. She didn't have such a feeling until she came to the tea house and saw Zhao Lei's face and her trademark messy short hair. Though she had seen Zhao Lei on the light screen, she was still more shocked to see the real person in front of her. This pretty girl with short hair, who looked no more than 15 or 16 years old, was actually a few hundred years old. It was true that a woman's perspective was always so peculiar. Zhao Lei didn't pay attention to her self-introduction. She nodded slightly and looked out of the window again. Ran Handong didn't think she was being rude, since she was a few hundred years old and a fairy lady. Zonglizi was aware that Zhao Leo had gone to see that person. As she was about to ask her how the conversation went, she heard her question first. "What's that?" asked Zhao Leu while pointing to a spot outside the window. Zonglizi and Ran Handong followed her finger, and saw the young men and women in the square across the street, and heard the cheerful voices. "The floating electronic skateboard." Ran Handong went on with a smile. "The Special District of Capital has strict control over the flying devices, but they don't care about this kind of toy. And the setting of the floating skateboards is that they can't exceed 5 meters. I played with them for a few days when I was young, but I soon lost interest in them." "I'm interested in them," said Zhao Lei. This was the main street of the Special District of Capital. Jingzhou had walked here before. The building of the military headquarters was located at the end of the street, looking like a battleship anchored there, shining under the morning sunlight. The young people in the square across the street had a new playmate. The girl with short hair was very pretty. She was using the latest and most expensive floating skateboard, but it seemed that she had never used it before. She should be a newbie. As a few young men were about to give her a ride and teach her, the girl seemed to have suddenly understood something. Along with the morning wind, she leapt up on the floating skateboard with a faint buzzing sound. How could a girl who could ride a flying sword not know how to ride a skateboard? Standing on the opposite side of the street, Zonglizi and Ran Handong were in a daze for a long time as they watched the girl riding the skateboard at a high speed amid the cheers. "She seems to be very happy," said Zonglizi suddenly. Ran Handong nodded while looking in that direction. The morning sunlight shone on the distant building of the military headquarters, as well as on Zhao Lei's face. The sky was not blue. The distant battleships could be vaguely seen, but the clouds were still as white as before. Her smile was as beautiful as ever. That guy was still alive. It was really nice. There was an inconspicuous planet by the edge of the Scorpion Tail Nebula. Due to the heavy pollution, the sky here was seldom blue, and the clouds were often gloomy, looking like the oars. A dilapidated spaceship was landing slowly in the distance. The line for food on the spaceship was already long. The hardships of life and the depression brought about by the blockade had no effect on the young people. The cheers and curses could be heard from time to time on the court full of cracks. No cars could be seen on the street of the court. A dilapidated skateboard ran over the rainwater. As soon as it flew into the air, it bumped into the barbed wire, making a crisp sound. The youth riding the skateboard let out a painful cry as he fell to the ground. His companions approached him to check on his injury. Some of them paid attention to the dilapidated skateboard, yelling that they should be the next one. A youth was sitting on the half-wall on the other side of the court. The young man was wearing a very ordinary blue hoodie with a green rope tied around his wrist. That was the only accessory on his body. In comparison to the bustling crowd on the other side of the wall, he looked rather lonely and desolate, as if he were in another world. The snowflakes suddenly fell down from the sky. Looking at the snowflakes falling down from the sky, the youth recited a poem. The poem was a bit fragmented, and a few words like needle and sun could be vaguely heard. Then, he took out a harmonica and started playing it. Chapter 9:14. If it was raining like before, the kids playing basketball and skateboarding would definitely go home. On this heavily polluted planet, acid rain was the most annoying thing for everyone. However, it rarely rained these days, and all that was falling was snowflakes. They did not care and continued to play basketball happily. Some of the teenagers even took off their shirts and kept sprinting in the snow. Their laughter became louder. The sound of a harmonica came from afar, faintly discernible in the laughter and cursing. A few teenagers who did not have their turn to skateboard looked in the direction of the sound and saw the teenager in blue on the wall. There was nothing wrong with the tone or rhythm of the harmonica played by the teenager in blue. The problem was that it was too standard, so the feeling of machinery and imitation was very strong. It was not very pleasant to listen to, and it could be said that it lacked a sense of freedom, or perhaps it lacked a sense of artistry. But in any case, in the snowflakes falling from the sky, on top of the abandoned wall, a lonely young man playing the harmonica was indeed a moving scene. Those young men were still very young, but they also had some inexplicable emotions. Why are you still playing basketball? Don't think that it's okay just because it's snow. It's still corrosive when it melts. Especially the few of you, you're even shirtless. Do you want to die? Hurry up and go home. If you need to review your homework, do it. Wait until it stops snowing. The laughter, quarrels, and the sound of the harmonica were all interrupted by a stern voice at the same time. The person who spoke was a lady in her 40s. Although her voice was stern, her expression was very gentle, and the corners of her lips were slightly raised with a smile. The teenagers playing basketball and skateboarding stopped one after another. Some complained unhappily, but they obediently began to put on their clothes and prepared to leave. At the same time, they greeted the lady. The lady was called Eve, and she was a member of the Community Management Committee. However, this was only a part-time job. Her official occupation was the administrative officer of the city's Lower West District Administrative Activity Center. Her main responsibility was to work with young people. She often went to various schools to inspect, so these teenagers knew her. Eve touched the head of a little boy and said a few words to them with a smile. Suddenly, she heard the sound of the harmonica coming from afar. She looked over curiously and saw the teenager in blue on top of the wall. She asked with a slightly surprised expression, "Who is that?" "He moved here a few days ago. He lives in District 7, 720. He lives in the house on the first floor. I heard that there's only him and his sister at home. There seems to be something wrong with his sister's head. Let's not talk about his sister. There seems to be something wrong with this guy as well. Have you guys talked to him until today? Do you know his name?" After listening to the youngster's introduction, Eve looked at the youngster on the wall and felt some sympathy. Gene optimization was now very common, but congenital genetic diseases were still very difficult to treat, especially problems related to the brain, which required a lot of money. A medical problem that required a lot of money to solve was something that only a few people on this planet had the qualifications to solve. Don't talk about people behind their back. You call this the back? Besides, what's wrong with saying a few words? Don't tell me he'll rush over and hit me? My mom said not to bother with crazy people. Who knows what will happen? That guy isn't crazy. I think he's called autism? The discussion among the youths continued. Eve shook her head and looked away. She said to them, "Let's go. It looks like the snow will be heavier today." "Teacher Eve, when will the ban be lifted? I hold it in every day. Please, even if the ban is lifted, can people like us go to other planets? We can still play basketball and skateboard here. What's the difference? I've read the news that we will have to register for the second time. Considering the ban, it feels like the government is looking for something. Do you think they are looking for the rumored weapon of the stellar level? Ha 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 ha. Why don't you say they are looking for the Emperor of the Sea of Dark Matter? Teacher, you take this. No need. I've brought an umbrella." Teacher Eve took another look at the youngster on the ruined wall and opened the old-fashioned membrane umbrella in her hand to block the snowflakes falling down from the sky. The rest of the youngsters opened their own umbrellas or turned on the airflow devices, walking toward the outside of the basketball court in groups of 2 or 3. Soon, they disappeared into the paths between the buildings in the residential area. The world grew quiet. The youngster in blue wiped the harmonica with his sleeve and put it in his pocket before he turned around and jumped down from the wall. His actions were slow, from taking down the harmonica, wiping it, putting it in the pocket and jumping down from the wall, as if he had divided a normal action into many details. It was understandable that his other actions were slow, but why did he jump down from the wall seem so slow? It had something to do with the gravity of the planet. The sneakers landed on the ground, splashing up a few snowflakes. The youngster's face was revealed after his hat was lifted up a bit. It was a clean and ordinary face. His eyes were clean, but they were devoid of any depth, looking like a small stream that could be seen to the end if one looked at it casually. The people with such eyes were usually very simple, and they were even too naive and stupid. The youngster put on the hat again and walked past the quiet basketball court with his head lowered. He passed the walls full of the marks left by the skateboard and followed the path near the garbage dump and the lake outside the residential area until he reached the 7th district, which was the furthest away. There were 38 residential buildings in the 7th district. Building number 720 was located in the outermost area. Building number 720 was located in the outermost area. After climbing over the railing, it was an abandoned agricultural area. Nobody would usually come here, so it was exceedingly quiet and even a bit dreadful. There was no bicycle tram in the 30-meter-wide area in front of the building, nor were there any luxurious hover cars. There were no neat lawns in the flower beds either. There were some vegetables and wild wheat sprouts that had not been harvested last winter in the corner. A layer of snow had already covered them, and there were no bamboo leaves stepped on by birds or flowers left behind by cats. Walking to the door of the iron unit, the youngster took out a key from his pants pocket and inserted it into the lock somewhat slowly. He slowly shook it left and right twice before opening the door. Walking into the building, the wooden doorknob of the room on the left had congealed soup that had spilled on it at some point. The iron door of the room on the right was full of rust. This time, he did not take out the key again. Instead, he knocked on the door directly. The sound of his fingers hitting the iron door was somewhat dull, but the rhythm was very stable. With a creak, the iron door was forcefully pushed open from the inside, revealing an innocent and good-looking little face. "Brother, you're back?" The youngster stood outside the door in silence for a while, as if thinking about how he should answer this question. In the end, he only responded with a grunt. The girl who had called him brother did not feel anything strange about him. She ran back to the living room in her cotton slippers and sat down on the cushioned chair. She reached out and hugged the big snow-white doll in her arms, continuing to watch TV. The TV screen was playing a cartoon. He did not know what the content was, but the little girl could not stop giggling. The snow-white doll in her arms was also giggling. Because it did not have a mouth, its eyes were squinted into two curved lines. It looked very cute but also very strange. The youngster changed into slippers and walked into the room. He stood beside the soft chair and looked at the little girl and the doll in her arms. He opened his mouth, wanting to say something, but he could not think of what he should say. There was a bow on the snow-white doll's head. That bow suddenly flew up and landed on the youngster's shoulder, hitting his neck at high speed, as if giving him a massage. At the same time, it told him what had happened today, and that the little girl's illness seemed to be acting up again, and that she had forgotten to cook. The little thing that could do so many things and use its body to express the military code couldn't be a real bow, and it was not a butterfly either. It was Cold Cicada. The doll was the snow girl. The youngster holding the doll was Hua Shi, and the person Hua Shi called brother was Jingjiu. It had been some time since they left the underground world and came to this city. Though they did not live in isolation from the outside world, they lived their lives casually, or rather roughly. Hua Shi had forgotten many things because the chip behind her neck was damaged. She looked like a real child, often giggling foolishly while watching TV. The snow girl giggled foolishly while watching TV. It was unclear if she thought many things in this world were ridiculous, or she thought the current Jingjiu was ridiculous. The current Jingjiu was like a terminal operating in the most power-saving mode. The consumption of power was very low, and his calculating ability and other abilities were reduced to the minimum. If he took one more step forward, he would fall asleep or die. If he increased the power a bit, the program of the inherited heaven sword would be triggered. In this state, Jingjiu indeed looked like an autistic child, or an autistic person, but in the eyes of the Snow Girl, he was a retard. The immortal Jingyang had turned into a retard. Wasn't it ridiculous? His face had changed a lot, probably because his appearance was born from the heart, and it was even more ridiculous in the eyes of the Snow Girl. "Go and cook," said Jingjiu. Hua Shi thought for a while with her head tilted, and then remembered what she had forgotten to cook today. She got up and went to the kitchen hastily after uttering an "ah." Jingjiu sat on the soft chair. He placed a few cushions behind him mechanically and leaned against them slowly. He reached out his hand to take the remote control and turned to the news channel. The Snow Girl glanced at him expressionlessly, thinking that she wouldn't kill him since he was a retard. Forward to the number 2 base, abnormal permanent star activity, space crack, shocking. The news anchor on the TV screen was saying something seriously. Jingjiu actually didn't understand. He didn't even know why he was watching the news channel. He only remembered that it seemed to be something important. At this moment, Hua Shi's voice came from the kitchen. "Do you want white vinegar or aged vinegar for the sour and spicy rice?" Jingjiu looked at the TV screen in silence for a long time. Both Hua Shi and the Snow Girl looked at him, waiting for his answer. He said, "The wheat field is meaningless." Chapter 9:15. Thud, thud, thud. Hua Shi trotted out of the kitchen and asked while looking at Jingjiu, "What's meaningless?" She held the kitchen knife in her right hand and the cabbage that had been cut in half in her left hand. Her face was slightly red. It was unclear whether it was because of the fire or because she was anxious. It should be noted that the kitchen of this suite was in the living room, and the living room where Jingjiu watched TV was actually a larger bedroom, with 2 walls facing the mountains and windows. The cold air seeped into the room, making it a bit gloomy and cold. Hua Shi didn't understand what Jingjiu meant. It was because she didn't understand anything at the moment. But the Snow Girl didn't understand either. She stared at Jingjiu, her dark eyes full of frustration and anger. Even though she was knowledgeable and knew many languages, she still couldn't understand what he meant by saying such a thing. Jingjiu didn't pay attention to Hua Shi's question and the look in the Snow Girl's eyes. As an autistic person, he now had sufficient reasons to ignore the world and not be disturbed by it. Hua Shi curled her lips and walked out with the knife and cabbage in her hand. The Snow Girl reached out her chubby hand and snatched the remote control from Jingjiu's hand, turning it back to the cartoon channel. It didn't take long for the dinner to be ready. There was a pot of nutrition blocks, a plate of sour and spicy steamed pork, and a plate of pickled vegetables made of an unknown material. They are all vegetables sold on the street. I overheard the aunties say that the quality of the vegetables is better than what they used to buy, and it's free. Hua Shi continued with a silly smile while scooping the rice. I also took a jar of pickled vegetables secretly. I really don't understand what the people here are thinking. It's enough to have the nutrition grains. Why do they still want to eat vegetables? Jingjiu sat by the table and thought for a long time before he said slowly, "It seems to be vitamins." Hua Shi handed the chopsticks to him and said, "You can get the multivitamins." Jingjiu took the chopsticks and started eating. It was true that he started eating now. It wasn't because his body was in a bad condition, but because he forgot that he didn't need to eat. Hua Shi didn't know about this, and the Snow Girl didn't want to remind her. As for Cold Cicada, it always kept quiet out of fear when the Snow Girl wanted to punish Jingjiu. Jingjiu ate very slowly. Fortunately, he didn't eat much. It was more like some kind of ritual, and there were very few dishes to begin with. Dinner was soon over. He slowly cleared the dishes and went to the kitchen to wash them. The hot water in the residential area was provided collectively. In the past, it was used as a symbol of money, but now it was used casually during special times. Therefore, many families were extremely wasteful, especially when there were many people washing dishes and bathing before and after dinner, so the water pressure was somewhat insufficient. The hot water that came out of the faucet was as thin as a gossamer. Fortunately, his actions of washing the dishes were also appallingly slow, and his coordination was not bad. Huashi sat back on the soft chair and continued to watch TV. Shuijie stretched out her chubby little hand and snapped her fingers soundlessly. No one knew what she meant. It became brighter outside the window. The birch trees that were 3 or 4 stories tall were shining. They were mixed with the snowflakes, and it was hard to tell them apart. There was no internet in this room, only a TV. The entertainment seemed a little monotonous, but Shuijie was very satisfied. When she first discovered that this was an information society, she felt that it was very difficult to avoid the eyes of the central computer. That was why she was so scared and only dared to hide in the underground sewer. Now she understood that as long as she didn't go online, didn't ask around, and wasn't curious, it was actually not difficult to cut off contact with this world. It was even as simple as living like most ordinary people on this planet. When you stare at the abyss will stare at you. If you don't look at it, how will the abyss look at you? Who the hell are you? There was an entertainment program on TV. 2 young idols who were very famous in the Scorpion Tail Nebula were wearing spacesuits and floating in space with a distance of more than 10 feet. They were trying to make each other guess the words they saw. There was no air in the universe, so naturally there was no sound transmission. The 2 of them were trying their best to make gestures, which looked very funny. Huashi was shaking with laughter, and Shuijie's eyelashes were curved. Jingjiu was washing the dishes. The scene was so warm. At this moment, the doorbell suddenly rang. Jingjiu was washing the dishes and didn't open the door. Of course, even if he didn't do anything, he wouldn't open the door, and Shuijie wouldn't open the door either. These days, there were enthusiastic neighbors who came to visit with potatoes and other things, but they didn't pay attention to them. They received strange and cold comments from the residents of the community and silence. They didn't want this quiet life to be broken by any accidents. It wasn't because they yearned for this so-called quiet life, but because they were afraid of death. Huashi was a little curious about the outside world and people, but now that her IQ was like that of a child, she would only listen to them. The doorbell stopped ringing, but not long after, it rang again. Outside the frosty balcony window, there was a knocking sound and an apologetic voice. "Sorry to disturb you. I'm Eve, a staff member of the Life Management in the 7th District. My current job is in the Education Department. Recently, I'm going through a second identity registration, so I need to fill out a form in advance. I heard your harmonica today, and I think it's very good. There's a special training class in the activity center. Are you interested in joining? I've left the registration materials and introduction at the door. If you're interested, you can take a look." After saying this, the lady left. The sound of her boots stepping on the snow was very clear, and so was the sound of the car door closing. The thickness of the snow now was about 3 to 4 centimeters. She was about 1.64 meters tall, and her left foot was slightly larger. Jingjiu also confirmed a lot of other information, but he didn't know how he knew all of this. Huashi glanced at Shuijie, and then went out to look at Jingjiu. Seeing that they didn't stop her, she happily opened the door and brought in a file. In the file, other than the second identity verification form, there were a few colorful leaflets and 3 registration instructions. There were many interest classes in the activity center of the Education Department. They were set up for different age groups and levels. As the closed period went on, these activities weren't affected. Instead, they were getting better and better. Speaking of which, most of the mining industry had stopped working, and the workers didn't need to go to work. Many industries were also affected. With the support of the government, people's lives weren't too big of a problem. Then, they had to solve the next problem. What were they doing? There were many kinds of interest classes. There were many sports, and some very unconventional courses such as technical courses. There were also many common courses such as music and art. Looking at the leaflets, Jingjiu was a little curious. He asked uncertainly, Can I? Xue Jiayi looked at this scene expressionlessly. She was sure that he was really crazy, and not pretending to be stupid. Jingyang actually liked the 4 arts. If he wasn't crazy, then what was? After the variety show named Silent Scream ended, Hua Shi went to her bedroom to sleep. There was a single camp bed in the bedroom. Jingjiu sat on the chair and held Xue Jiayi in his arms. Xue Jiayi reached out her chubby little hand and snapped her fingers silently. The light in the room gradually dimmed. The light shining on the birch forest outside the window also faded in the following time. Just like he didn't need to eat, Jingjiu didn't need to sleep either. But now that he had forgotten all the magic methods and couldn't meditate, he felt that he needed to sleep, and he actually learned to sleep. Yet, the feeling of not knowing anything while sleeping made him feel restless and scared. As such, he could only fall asleep while holding the Xue Jiayi in his arms. As for why he didn't feel scared while holding the Xue Jiayi in his arms, it was because he remembered subconsciously that the Xue Jiayi was the strongest being in this world. The Xue Jiayi didn't like being held in his arms to sleep, and she didn't want to turn into melatonin, but she didn't refuse him when she thought of his subconscious respect for her. Cold cicada flew up and landed in front of the window, staring at the soundless falling snow outside the window vigilantly. The Xue Jiayi's hair was spread out, looking like a little girl's hair before going to bed. In the middle of the night, Jingjiu suddenly had a headache. His face was extremely pale, and his eyebrows and eyes were a bit twisted. The Xue Jiayi reached out her chubby little hand and placed it between his eyebrows. An unimaginably cold intent spread out. Jingjiu's expression had gradually relaxed, and his breathing had steadied. Drinking hot water couldn't solve this problem, and it wasn't the same as using ice cubes to relieve the pain. Instead, it was using the extremely low temperature to reduce the activity of the particles and completely suppress the discharge of electricity in the brain. The room was as cold as an icehouse because of the cold intent, and the frost on the window spread from the inside to the outside. The drops of water on the hot water pipe froze into ice, forming a line and hanging down into a column, looking like a row of sharp swords. Jingjiu fell asleep again, his face still pale. Looking at him, the Xue Jiayi's black eyes were full of pity and sympathy. Someone as powerful as Jingyang was still so pitiful in this world. How pitiful would it be if she became like Jingjiu? Her line of sight fell on Jingjiu's wrist. Looking at the green rope on his wrist, it was unclear what she was thinking about. In the early morning the next day, before dawn, Hua Shi got up while wrapped in the quilt, saying while trembling, Big brother, melatonin is bad again." Jingjiu didn't know what had happened. After some thought, he said to the Xue Jiayi, "Please repair it." The Xue Jiayi was expressionless, thinking, even if I'm omnipotent, do I still need to be a plumber or electrician? Hua Shi took a hot bath and finally warmed up. When Jingjiu was washing his face, he saw the sword-like icicles on the hot water pipe. He was lost in thought. Why do they look so familiar? Today's breakfast was even more shabby than yesterday's dinner, with only 2 pieces of bread. Jingjiu looked at the colored pages on the table and was silent for a while. Then he suddenly said, "I want to learn piano. I like lifestyle the most. I want to make a variety show." Chapter 9:16. Squeak. The iron door of the room on the right on the first floor of room 720 was opened. Soon after, the door of the unit in room 720 was opened with another squeak. Jingjiu walked into the snowflakes and pulled up the hood of his blue hoodie habitually to cover his head. Hua Shi closed the door of the unit with some effort. She tightened the black backpack on her back and followed Jingjiu to the outside of the neighborhood with the snow girl in her arms. The snow girl was indeed very small, and she looked like an adorable doll. However, she was too big to be held in the arms of a young girl like Hua Shi, so she was easily noticeable. Normally, she should stay at home, but she didn't dare leave Jingjiu for too long, just like Jingjiu didn't dare leave her subconsciously. The snowflakes were so heavy and the wind so cold that it was reasonable for them to hug each other to keep warm, even though they were the two strongest swordsmen in Chaotian. The snowy ground was as white as a blanket. The footprints left by the woman named Eve the night before had been covered by the snow a long time ago. There was only a row of bamboo leaves on the ground in the flower bed, which should have been left by a bird not long ago. After leaving the residential area, the two of them took the subway to the center of the city. No flying device was allowed to take off or land on this planet, and it was in a state of lockdown. However, it didn't have much effect on the people living here. Like the conversation between the youths on the basketball court the day before, how many people could afford the ticket to leave the planet even if the planet wasn't locked down? After the pirate clans that had occupied this planet for many years were destroyed by the battleships of the military, the government had more opportunities to display its power. As far as the populace was concerned, it was even better in some aspects, like the welfare benefits, the tutoring classes in the activity center, and the public security. There were not many people on the subway. They sat at a suitable distance from each other. Once in a while, someone cast a curious glance at the doll in Hua Shi's arms, but nobody asked her anything. After arriving at the Shigu station, Jingjiu and Hua Shi got off the subway according to the traffic signs. They looked at the traffic signs for a long time in bewilderment before they found the exit 16. 2. Fortunately, the building in the activity center was very large, like a mountain lying in the middle of the square. They could see it as soon as they got off the subway, so they wouldn't get lost again. As they arrived in front of the activity center, Jingjiu reached out his left hand clumsily and put the bracelet on the scanning device. Hua Shi opened her eyes wide and imitated Jingjiu's action. She passed through the scanning door along with two beeping sounds. The security guard could tell that there was something wrong with their intelligence, so he didn't make things difficult for them. He even patiently asked them what they wanted to do. Hua Shi became very nervous when she was questioned. She timidly hid behind Jingjiu. Jingjiu listened to the other party's words in a daze. He took out the leaflet and placed it in front of the security guard. The security guard looked at the official contact number on the leaflet and helped them make the call. Not long after, Ms. Eve hurried out of the elevator. Ms. Eve was a little surprised to see Hua Shi behind Jingjiu. Then she remembered that there were only two siblings in their family, so she understood why. She introduced herself with a smile and led them into the building. She asked Jingjiu softly, "Do you want to learn the instrumental music basic course or the harmonica specialization course?" Jingjiu thought for a long time. He grunted and then remained silent for a long time. The atmosphere in the elevator became a little strange. At this moment, Hua Shi's voice, as small as a mosquito, came from behind him. "He wants to learn the piano." Ms. Eve was surprised again. She subconsciously looked at Jingjiu's hand and found that his fingers were slender and beautiful. They looked like a pair of hands that played the piano. She couldn't help but smile and asked Hua Shi, "What about you? Do you want to learn something too?" Hua Shi was still hiding behind Jingjiu. She lowered her head and pressed against his back, saying in a voice as small as a mosquito, "No need. I'll find a place to sit and wait for my brother." Hearing her voice, Ms. Eve felt even fonder of her. She said in a gentle voice, "How about I take you to the reading room after the registration?" Hua Shi uttered a soft "hmm." The door of the elevator opened. Ms. Eve led the way, and Jingju followed her. Hua Shi picked up her pace to catch up with the doll that was half her height in her arms. No one noticed that the bow hairpin on the doll's head trembled slightly. Cold Cicada felt very tired. Hua Shi didn't answer the question. Those mosquito-like voices were made by her. After taking Jingjiu to the piano class after the registration, Ms. Eve took Hua Shi to the reading room and asked her to remember the number of her bracelet so that she wouldn't wander around. Ms. Eve went back to her office to deal with her own affairs. An hour and 55 minutes later, the bracelet buzzed slightly, indicating that it was an alarm clock. She rubbed her tired eyes and stopped the second registration. She walked to the outside of the piano class and looked into the classroom. She saw the youth in a blue hoodie at first glance. During the lockdown period, the government provided all kinds of assistance in a timely and generous manner, but they couldn't put dozens of pianos in the classroom. The police station was very strong, and the strong people who often appeared in the sky above the city years ago had long disappeared. No one knew whether they had died in the military's purge, or they had escaped before the planet was closed. The people in the subway were still sitting not too far away from each other. It was very quiet in the carriage, and only the low hum of the suspended rail could be heard. The light and shadow advertisements outside the window were probably in the process of being changed, so it looked a little dark. Of course, it could also be used as a mirror, if one had this kind of interest. A tall and thin man in a beige trench coat and a black mask stood up from Yenshan. He walked to the opposite side of Jingjiu and Hua Shi and sat down. The few passengers in the carriage subconsciously scattered to the distance, like dots on an inflated balloon or stars in the process of the Big Bang. Jingjiu looked down at the rapidly flashing light on the floor, imagining it as the black and white keys of a piano. He played silently in his heart, not noticing who was sitting opposite him. Hua Shi opened her eyes wide and looked at the man in the trench coat curiously. She was not afraid at all. There was also no interlude. The two got off the subway, walked through the stadium in the light snow, walked past the old wall that was full of scars from the collision of skateboards, walked past the lake full of wild reeds, walked past the garbage dump, and went through a small door to return to 720. It was already evening, and the street lights gradually turned on. Other buildings also gradually lit up with dim yellow and warm lights. The snow in the flower bed was illuminated. In addition to the bamboo leaf-like bird paw prints, there was also a line of cat paw prints that looked like plum blossoms. There was also some dark red blood in front of them. Just by looking at the remaining traces, one could imagine the fierce scene of a wild cat preying on a flying bird at that moment. Xue Jiai looked at the snow, and a touch of appreciation flashed through her black eyes. She stretched out her round little hand and snapped her fingers silently. The light in the room on the first floor of 720 was lit up, and then the lights in several rooms on the third, fourth, and sixth floors were lit up one after another. There was no one else in this building, only they lived here. The order and distribution of the lights in those rooms seemed to be random, without any rules, but in fact it was very meticulous. It would make all the people who saw it feel that it was reasonable and like home. Jingjiu looked at those rooms that were lit up and said slowly, "It's like chess, stars." When they got home, the first thing they did was, of course, to cook. As soon as the steamer was turned on, the steam came naturally. Before the fragrance of the pastries came out, the window of the kitchen leading to the balcony was covered with a thick layer of frost, blocking the scene outside. Hua Shi vaguely felt that there was something outside. She thought it was a cat pouncing on a bird again, so she reached out to wipe the fog off the window and saw the man in the trench coat she met on the subway standing on the flower bed. She thought it was a coincidence that he also lived in this community. She giggled and nodded to him to greet him. Chapter 9:17. The name of the man in the windbreaker was Fong Lian. He was not a famous pirate, but he was very powerful. He was a true swordsman in the upper state of the Star region. He had been running amok in the periphery of the great industrial Star region for a long time. The authorities of the Federation of the Milky Way had not been able to catch him even though they had been searching for him for many years. A few days ago, when all the space channels from the Scorpion Tail Nebula to the main space zone were sealed, and all the planets were forbidden from taking off and landing spaceships, he suddenly found himself a beast in a cage. Ordinary people couldn't feel the feeling of being imprisoned, because for them, a planet or even a city was already a big enough world. However, abilities were always related to space. For a star state expert, living on a planet for a long time would be suffocating and dangerous. The Alliance military had only sent 3 warships to destroy that famous pirate family. He couldn't imagine what would happen to him if he was discovered. He had been hiding in the abandoned mines and fields of this planet for a long time. As a star state expert, he had little need for food. Normally, he should have been able to survive for another year and a half. However, the military blockade was getting tighter and tighter, and there seemed to be no end to it. The most troublesome thing was that he heard that the government was going to register again. Was it targeting him? An inexplicable sense of uneasiness and fear grew in his mind. He decided to find a way to leave this place, so he returned to the city and asked the people in the dark for a way to leave. However, he found that the lockdown this time was too tight. There were no loopholes at all. Even the military's old spaceflight suits and star field maps could not be obtained. He did not want to return to the wilderness that was full of pollution and noise. However, all cities had their own order. In addition to the order of the government, there was also the order of the underground. The controllers of those orders were not stronger than him, but they were all local forces and even had the backing of the government. They would not allow him to stay in their territory for too long. As the saying goes, a galaxy can only have one sun. After a while, Fong Lian arrived at the city called Fog Mountain. He was surprised to find that there were no secret controllers in the city. There were not even a few strong masters. This situation was magnified, and the security of the city was unimaginably good. It was almost like a civilized city in the home star field. He did not believe in such a thing and began to wander around the city, trying to find the controller who was hiding in the dark. Perhaps it was his own idea, or perhaps it was the voice in his head that incessantly urged him to do so. He wandered in the city for a long time, but he still found nothing. Until he met a strange brother and sister on the subway that day. The strange thing was that they were not afraid of him. Fong Lian followed them out and got off the subway. He walked past them and walked past them in the subway. From afar, he watched the lights of the simple and crude old building light up. He stood on the flower bed. Many years ago, he was a member of a special group in the military. During a risky genetic modification, something went wrong, causing his mental state to become unstable, and he was forced to leave the military. The failure of the genetic modification and his life made him very violent and even bloodthirsty. But now, looking at the lights in front of him, his mood became abnormally calm. He decided to let the brother and sister live for the time being. He would first investigate the other party's information and then come back to kill them tomorrow. Then, he would use this place as his hideout to avoid arrest. He had Lian. That who he or she would. Lian of and in. Lian he. The girl nodded at him. Fong Lian was stunned for a while. He thought, "You are a fool. Since you have seen my face, you should die now." The little girl nodded at him in greeting. Fong Lian was stunned for a while before he came back to his senses. He thought to himself, "So you're a fool. Since you've seen my face, then you should die now to avoid any more trouble." "There is someone outside," Hua she said casually after she returned to the steamer and confirmed that the pastry was not hot. Jing Jiu took a stool and sat in front of the window. His hands were hanging in the air. He was probably playing the piano. It looked like the entry-level boxing of the Aoyama sect at the South Pine Pavilion. Shuejiai was sitting in the corner of the chair, watching the cartoon on the TV screen. Her black eyes were full of concentration and happiness. Nobody paid attention to her. Nobody paid attention to her. Fang Lian walked down the flower bed and toward room 720. Snowflakes fell on his beige windbreaker and then fell down. A cold and sinister aura rose from the ground. Hua Shi looked back and said, "He is coming." Shuejiai was watching TV. Jingjiu was practicing the piano. Both of them ignored her. There was a slight buzzing sound. All the lights in the living area flickered. Fang Lian stopped. He found that there was something in the wind and snow in front of him. It was a white beetle. It was crystal clear and clean, even giving off a sense of sacredness. It was unknown how it was hanging in the air in silence. It didn't make any sound. It was like a snowflake that was beyond the rules of space. Fang Lian suddenly felt extremely cold. He was so scared that he turned around and flew away. Pop, pop, pop. It was the sound of hundreds of snowflakes hitting the windbreaker. These sounds were heard almost at the same time. It could be imagined how fast a swordsman at the upper state of Star State could move when he exerted his full strength. The windbreaker was torn apart. Those snowflakes penetrated deeply into Fang Lian's body and then flew out from the other side. Every snowflake was like the sharpest knife in the world made of a special alloy. Countless pieces of blood and flesh fell on the ground, but they didn't make any sound. Fang Lian still couldn't figure out how the soft snowflakes could become so sharp and hard until his consciousness dissipated. Then he died. The snow stopped falling. Cold cicada flew to the flower bed. Thinking of the blood stains on the snowflakes and the blood stains left by the small bird, it chirped contentedly twice. The snowy clouds in the night sky had dispersed for some reason. It was rare for the atmosphere to be so clean, and the stars in the sky could be seen clearly. Looking at the starry sky and the battleship in the distance, Cold Cicada thought that it was truly lonely. This was probably the feeling of a sovereign descending to the world. Hua Shi's voice rang out on the other side of the balcony. "She wants to eat ice cream. Come and help her." Cold Cicada was slightly alarmed. It flew back as quickly as it could. It broke the milk in the pot and added the icing sugar, and then froze it into ice cream as quickly as possible. This was probably the most delicious and precious ice cream in the universe. Like the previous day, the dinner was still sour and spicy rice with rice, but the dinner became more sumptuous and messy because of the pastries given by the Mistress Eve and the ice cream made by Cold Cicada. The Snow Girl was not an idiot, so she wouldn't eat like a fool like Jingjiu. She didn't keep watching the cartoon either, and jumped into the flower bed from the balcony. The color of the blood on the snowflakes was truly beautiful. Recalling the quilt she used to wrap herself in Aoyama, she suddenly had an idea. Cold Cicada moved a little gingerly, reminding its mistress to take a look at its work, intending to show off. The Snow Girl didn't care about such a lowly method of killing, but for some reason she looked at the corpse and then reached out her small round hand. Pa! A tiny, transparent piece of ice fell on her hand. She looked at it in silence for a while, thinking that this thing was rather interesting because it could exist for so many years and control one's mind by constantly emitting mental energy. She released a cold energy and froze the corpse of the man in the windbreaker, a few feathers, and the blood stains into the tiniest powder. Then she returned to the room. Jingjiu shot her a glance while biting the ice cream. The Snow Girl didn't explain, thinking that Jingjiu was an idiot at the moment. What she wanted to say was that this was a hair of Shun Aoyama. But were you really an idiot? Or were you still pretending? She stroked the transparent ice flakes softly with her small hand behind her back, wondering if she should give it another try if Jingjiu was indeed an idiot. Over the last few days, she would help Jingjiu whenever he had a headache. There was no love or hate for no reason. Jingzhou had helped her in Chaotian, but she had also helped him kill Byron. She was still willing to help him because she wanted to see if she could get some benefits from it, like having an extra sword. She had learned the inherited heaven sword back when she was at the 3000 nunnery, and it was no exaggeration to say that she had learned it better than Lu Xi and Zhuoruzhui. If she had the all-in-one sword, she would have a backup plan when she faced that young woman, and she would have a better chance of winning. It was indeed a great temptation. Unfortunately, it took her only a few seconds to learn the inherited heaven sword. She had been studying the green rope every night when she was held in Jingzhou's arms to sleep, but she still hadn't learned how to forge the inherited heaven sword. She had to admit that Shun Aoyama was indeed an outstanding person. After eating the ice cream, Jingzhou walked to the window and lifted his head to look at the rarely seen starry sky. He remained silent for a long time without uttering a word. Looking at his back, the snow girl and Hua, she suddenly felt nervous for some reason. In other words, the atmosphere grew tense. After a long while, he suddenly said, "I want to learn how to play chess." Having said that, he sat on the stool in front of the window, raised his hands, and continued playing the piano. The starlight shone on his hands through the window. His long fingers flexed and flexed from time to time, looking very powerful and extremely gentle. Hua, she pulled back her gaze and went to clean up the bowls and chopsticks. The snow girl gave up as well. She jumped onto the stool and continued watching the cartoon. It seemed that this guy had truly become an idiot and couldn't become that sword again. So she decided to learn whatever she wanted. She was already here. She wanted to eat something good. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Nights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.